And showers back in the forecast Wednesday.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, June 5th, 2017, and this is a regular Moscow City Council meeting, and we got a great crowd out here this evening. I'm glad you all could join us this evening. And with that, I will start with Catherine.
Well, let's all rise and say the pledge of the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Catherine. And the first order of business this evening is the approval of the minutes of May 15th, 2017.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion by Jim and a second by John to approve the minutes of May 15, 2017. I'll start the roll with Art.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will move on to the next item, which is staff recognition report. Gary Reedner, you have the podium, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to thank everyone for being here for the this prestigious award. It's my honor to recognize Rodney Cook as Wastewater Treatment Plant Operator of the Year for 2017 by the Northwest Clean Water Association. And in recognition of the wastewater treatment plant, I have a little bit of end-of-the-pipe humor. They want me to say how befitting it is to have a wastewater operator recognized as number 2 on this agenda.
But I'm cheating.
I told you it'd work. Okay, if I could have Rodney come up. The City of Moscow has made a sizable investment in a modern wastewater treatment plant, but the plant is only as good as the operators who run it. Rodney is a senior operator for the city, has worked at our plant for 16 years. In that time, he's been a key member of a team that assures the city maintains compliance with its discharge permit and protects the health of Paradise Creek. In addition, Rodney helps save millions of gallons a year by helping divert approximately 83 million gallons of water each year that the city provides to the University of Idaho reuse irrigation system. Rodney is a dedicated and well-respected operator. He's previously served as the president of the North Idaho Wastewater Treatment Plant Operators Section, and he continually is looking for ways to improve our efficiency and serves as a wonderful mentor for other operators. So with that, Mr. Mayor, if you could come up, Les, Tyler, and Todd, congratulations. I'll go man my camera. You guys got to come up.
Turn around. We want to get your front. We don't want to get your best side here. Best side? Okay. Everybody's rushing in here.
We're not photobombing this, are we?
Really, Tyler.
Put your head down, man.
Let's do one more since you guys are looking so good tonight. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to share something with you about Rodney. Here several weeks ago, he spearheaded and coordinated. Oh, okay. So everybody, I thought I had a booming enough voice I could get everybody here. Come on over here, Rodney.
Name and address.
Yeah. I'm not going to make Rodney speak if he doesn't want to, because these kind of guys, what they do is they do the work, they get certified, and they're very professional in the jobs that they do, both men and women of the city. And Rodney coordinated and has the last several years the inland, northwest
Idaho Operators Section for the state of Idaho. There's three sections statewide, and like I said, I was the president for the North Idaho Operator Section, and regional director for the state of Idaho for all of the operators, and 25 years in the making, and I got this award for all the stuff I've done over the last 25 years.
And now I want to brag a little bit about this guy, ladies and gentlemen, because, you know, that may seem like a small thing to most of us, but our sewage treatment plants, our water in our ground, the water that we drink and the things that we use. And I addressed the group. I got a chance to do a welcoming comments, and I got a chance to meet a number of different people throughout our entire state. And one of the things I always tell people is the mayor, one thing's for sure, if you turn the water on and it doesn't work, or if the garbage isn't picked up, or the sewage, you flush a toilet and it doesn't work, we get complaints immediately. No delay whatsoever, but these guys are the ones that always make sure it's right and safe for us. So these are the men and women, as I said earlier, behind the lines that do the hard work. So Rodney, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, that was all the reports you had, Gary?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we will go on to the next item, which is mayor's appointments, and I have two appointments that I'm going to ask the council to approve. Heather Bingman for Sustainable Environment Commission with a term that would expire 12/31 of 2018, and Annie Zabala, I hope I didn't butcher that name, Zabala, Fair and Affordable Housing Commission, expiration 12/31 of 2017. I'd entertain a motion from council.
I would move approval of the slate of appointees.
Second.
Give it to Gina.
I will.
Thanks, man.
Got a motion approval by Art and a second by Gene. I'll start the roll with John.
Aye.
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 Okay, we have quite a crew here, and usually whenever we have these appointments, is either Heather or Annie here this evening? Okay, I just wanted to give recognition to them because it takes a mountain of men and women in our community that volunteers for our commissions that we have throughout the city, so I want to thank them. So with that, we will move on to the next item, which is public comment and mayor's response period lasts for 15 minutes. I'll explain to you how this works. We give people 3 minutes to tell us what's on their mind, as long as it is not on this evening's agenda and or something in front of the Board of Adjustment or planning and zoning. So when you come up front, why, tell us what's on your mind if you wish, and we'll give you 3 minutes. I know Nils is going to be one of them. Give us your name and address also, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, Nils.
Bigger crowd than usual tonight. My name is Nils Peterson, 841 Travoy Way. I actually sent you an email earlier in the week to give you a heads up of what I was going to come here for, but since you have such a crowd, let me take a couple minutes and outline my question. So Moscow has a planning and zoning, has a comprehensive plan, which is its broad planning guidance document. And that document gets updated about once a decade, more or less. And that update process is underway now. And staff indicates that the review is of a minor nature, making a variety of updates, including updating data and things like that. My question to you is, will you direct P&Z to expand its review of the comprehensive plan to guide Moscow towards zero carbon emissions? This is an interesting time to be here because of the events that have happened in the last few days. But the best science that we have says that we need to decarbonize, and it says that we need to decarbonize by the middle of the century in order to stay below 2 degrees centigrade, a rise in global temperature. So things are going to happen. It may not be a straight path, it may not be a smooth path, it may have all kinds of bumps and twists and turns, but if we're going to achieve those two goals, the goal of 2 degrees, we're going to have to go to zero carbon. And I think about the railroad came to Moscow, and Moscow reshaped itself for the railroad. And the railroad left Moscow, and we're now reshaping ourselves again. Fossil fuels came to Moscow. We reshaped ourselves around that. I mean, look at the old pictures of the city. Horse-drawn wagons, dirt streets. Wasn't a big issue about lots of parking on Main Street. With fossil fuels, we've changed how we approach what we're going to do. I don't know what zero carbon looks like. 2050 is still 30 years away. But if We don't steer the ship. It's a slow changing thing. If you think about the railroads and the whole process, they've been gone a long time. We still haven't erased their marks. Steering the ship towards zero carbon in 2050 will take turning the rudder now. And so that's my request to you. Will you direct P&Z to begin in the comprehensive plan to state that we have some goals of moving the city towards zero carbon emissions? Thank you.
Thank you, Niels. And you did that in 2 minutes and 40 seconds, which was amazing. But you know, our carbon footprint, and we did a lot of things in the city. And one of the things that we do, just one thing, and I know lots of people do this because there's electric cars. We have electric vehicles in the city of Moscow, as well as the less fuel that we use. And I know Tyler Palmer just told us we've already this year so far used less than 1,000 gallons of fuel, and that's directly for a carbon emission thing. So we are making strides that way, and we're going to continue to do that. So as far as making a directive right for P&Z now, I think it's something that will be an ongoing conversation, Niels. And it's not going to go away. We know that. So,
Your Honor, if I may, just for the record, we've used 1,300 less gallons this year than we have in 2016, which is amazing in light of the heavy winter we had and all the plowing. So I just wanted to set the record
well,
straight.
and year over year, last year was quite a savings as well. And I don't remember exactly what the numbers were, but there was quite a savings because we reported in this council.
You bet.
So, and that always has an impact on our emissions. So with that, thank you, Nils. I'm going to ask others if they'd like to come up and speak, as I said, on something that is not on tonight's agenda or in front of P&Z or Board of Adjustments. Well, with that, we will go ahead and move on to item number 5, which is Citizens Commission Report, Transportation Commission. Les McDowell, I know Ben Calabretto is here somewhere. I spotted him earlier, and there he is.
Hiding by the door. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Good to be before you again this evening, and it's hard to believe it's actually been a year since we've had our last Transportation Commission report to the Council, but it's my pleasure to introduce to you Ben Calabretta. He is the Chair of the Transportation Commission, I believe in his second term this year, and he's going to give the presentation on behalf of the Commission.
Great. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Ben Calabretta. Thanks, Les. And it's great to see such a turnout for my Transportation Commission report. I appreciate you all. I hope I live up to it. So just a quick intro. The Transportation Commission, we consider all things transportation related in the city of Moscow. Not just vehicles. We talk a lot about bicycles and pedestrian traffic and accessibility and those types of things. And I was just going to go over a couple of the things that we've worked on in the last year or so. And there will be some visuals. So one of the things we talked about over the course of several meetings was a complete streets policy. And what we were able to do, basically a complete streets policy is a policy that brings in all the different variables around what you would consider when developing transportation networks. That includes like jurisdiction, the actual network itself, the design, the actual implementation. And working with city staff, we were able to review different policies from around the country, some well-written ones, some not so well-written, from communities of the same size as ours and have the same kind of concerns, and really kind of pick and choose what we liked, and then kind of turn it around, and I'm not sure if that's what maybe Les intended, but it kind of ended up being a bit of a review of what he already does and what they already do for the city of Moscow when considering these kind of things. So, with what is a complete street? I guess we can just talk about that. A safe, comfortable, and convenient travel via automobile, foot, bicycle, and transit. So it's really trying to address all modes of transportation. And so anyway, the policy's not up there, but we did finish a policy, and it will be coming up for a recommendation to the council soon. But anyway, so the good thing is everything that the City of Moscow is doing already fits within like a complete streets policy. It's just really about getting it written down and making sure that if something were to happen to our staff, that someone could pick it back up and know what exactly needed to happen to make sure that transportation was taken care of for anyone really. Next, so I wanted to hit on. There's been just in the last year we've had several kind of concerns coming from citizens, and once someone finds out you're on the Transportation Commission, these kind of things come up. So one of the main ones with our winter was the snow routes, and we all see signs throughout the city about the snow routes and not to park there and all that good stuff. It's been almost a decade, I want to say, before we actually since this was originally developed. What does that say? 2009? Yeah, well, 8 years, let's say. So we asked city staff to come in and kind of give us an overview of what the emergency snow routes, what that whole procedure is or what that even means, because this is the first winter in a long time we've had to really worry about it. So anyway, we reviewed the snow routes, and it led to a lot of discussion about one particular street that isn't a snow route, and the one that's circled up there in red, and that's Blaine Street, south from 6th. So heading south from 6th Street all the way down to like the East Side Marketplace. And really it's a heavily used pedestrian traffic. I mean, obviously a lot of automobile traffic uses it too, but a lot of pedestrians use it, lots of houses around there. So anyway, there's a lot of discussion about that, and we made a recommendation that be included in the snow route, as one of the snow routes. One thing we did learn is it never really gets to a point where it's the emergency snow route is put into action. Like it never
came close.
It never gets so bad that happens. But this does help, like Parks and Rec, figure out which sidewalks to clear off first with their plows and things like that. So that's one of the things we've talked about. The next thing was there was another citizen concern was about street lighting, and funny enough, the first time it came up, it was about the lack of street lighting at someone's house, and they talked to me about it, and it just happened to coincide with another. It didn't come to me, but I heard from another person about how the lights were too bright, and so we, it comes from both sides, and we understand it. But anyway, so what we did was just learn more about what the actual policy is, or like what a map would look like, and this kind of gives you the layout of what the lights look like and where, like on a block, street lights would be, basically at intersections. So that just kind of helped us understand it, so that when we were talking to citizens of Moscow, we could better explain it. Some other things, every once in a while we'll get waivers from developers to, or we'll get requests for waivers from developers to not maybe have to put in like a sidewalk or something because it doesn't necessarily make sense with the topography. So those are the types of things we will consider and make recommendations to council. I believe that's council. That sounds right. And then some other things we consider are when citizens or property owners want to have right-of-ways or easements vacated so that they can build on them, for example. So these are we don't obviously make the call on whether this happens. We just consider it from a transportation point of view, and then give our thoughts to the council. And finally, just kind of one of the funner things that we did. This is a pamphlet put together by the Chamber of Commerce, and they thought enough of us to ask for our input regarding like bicycle routes and pathways, and we had input on this map, which is more of Palouse-centric, so you can kind of see. So we didn't put this together, but we did provide input to the chamber to make so that what they were putting out to the public and to tourists actually made sense as far as like where you'd want to take your bike and that kind of thing. So that's, as far as like informational stuff, that's all I have, but I'm open to any questions that you all may have.
Well, thank you, Ben. Questions for Ben?
I have a question.
Good report.
Go ahead, Catherine.
You got to be at the bike share presentation by Zagster the other afternoon. What did you think?
So I don't want to go into what a bike share is, but just in case you don't know, basically it's a way for people to utilize bikes that they don't own, but they can like rent and then drive to a different location and drop it off. But I think it would be, I personally think it would be a great addition. I think it would get utilized a lot. I think there's some logistical things to work out, but I do think that it would be well received by the citizens of Moscow. Yeah, I mean, and they seem, you know, so I work over at Washington State, and they have a bike share there, and it's very popular, and people are always riding them, and so I don't necessarily see the downside, except maybe for the cost, but I do think it would be utilized and well received. So,
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
Well, Ben, thank you very much for a splendid report that you did, and thank the commission for your hard work.
Great. Thank you for having me.
There was one other announcement that I did not make, and that announcement was that there will not be an executive session tonight. So, council, just for your information. With that, we will move on to item number 6, which is the Art Walk Beer and/or Wine Garden Resolution, presented by Rod Hall. Rod?
Mayor, council members, Art Walk 2017 is a week from Friday, June 16th, 2017. I think in the packet it said it was June 17th, but it's actually June 16th. There's also been an update. There are 66 local businesses that are going to be hosting 125 local artists to provide venues for them to showcase their works. There are 2 resolutions tonight that are before you. The intent is to provide an incentive and to add to the festive atmosphere of the Art Walk. Last year, council passed a resolution to allow beer and wine gardens during the event. And the resolution, again before you tonight, would allow that option. It would allow appropriate city staff to process the permitting process to accommodate those who wish to take advantage of this, of the beer and wine gardens. And then also this year before you is a resolution to allow the temporary expansion of the sidewalk cafes that we did a couple years ago. Some of you might remember at the Vandal Down block party. Yeah, that had a lot of success. A lot of business took advantage of that. Under that resolution, it would allow a temporary expansion of a business who has a sidewalk cafe to go in front of the adjoining neighboring business as long as they have the permission from that business. And this would allow them to expand and enjoy and partake in Art Walk 2017. And so there's 2 resolutions. You just need to act on each one.
Okay, 2 separate resolutions that will have to be considered each independently. Council.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve the resolution related to the beer and wine gardens, the first part of that.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion by Jim and a second by Art to approve the resolution related to the beer and wine gardens. I'll start the roll with John.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay.
You're on a roll.
Oh, I'm on a roll. Okay. I would further move that we approve the resolution related to temporary expansion of sidewalk cafes for the Art Walk 2017.
Second.
Okay, we have another motion by Jim and a second by Art for the resolution related to temporary expansion of the sidewalk cafes. And I will start the roll with Art.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
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 Okay. Thank you very much, Rod. Now we will move on to item number 7, which is the appeal of the conditional use permit, LUP 2017-0007 for proposed educational institute at 112 North Main. Ryan is here somewhere, but before we get him up here and talk about things, I'm going to turn it over to Rod. We're going to kind of explain some things to the audience so everybody will know where we're going.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the reviewing authority on appeal. As permitted by state code, council has delegated the authority to grant or deny conditional use permits to the Board of Adjustment. Tonight before the council are 5 appeals from the Board of Adjustment's decision that granted a conditional use permit to the respondent on April 25th, 2017, and then the adopted written decision was approved on May 1st, 2017. Tonight's proceeding is still part of the quasi-judicial process, and like in a courtroom, council members are acting as a panel of judges. Any decision made is to be based upon the merits of the evidence that's already in the record. The Idaho Supreme Court has discussed the role of an appellate body in reviewing a lower authority's decision. I hope the following language provides guidance in the council's role tonight. Meaningful review of the original authority's decision on appeal is not for the purpose of substituting the reviewing authority's judgment for that of the original authority's judgment, but for the purpose of reviewing the original body's decision to see that it has applied the criteria prescribed by statute or ordinance and has not acted arbitrarily. The original body's decision must clearly and precisely state what it found to be the facts and fully explain why those facts led it to the decision it made. And so long as the findings, conclusions, and decisions are sufficiently detailed to demonstrate that it considered applicable standards and reached a reasoned decision, then the original body's decision is considered not to be arbitrary and capricious, and it is based on substantial evidence in the record.
Okay, with that being said, this is, as Rod said earlier, this is not a public hearing. That's already been done. This is a public meeting, and what we have here is we have 5 appellant letters from 5 different individuals. And as we go along, each individual will have 5 minutes to read their letter and explain their position on that. And at the end of that time, then there will be a rebuttal from the respondent for 15 minutes afterwards. And as we go along, each appellant letter will be decided on separately. So just kind of want to get the ground rules set forth. And as Rod had said, this is everything that was concerned within that public hearing before, and it will stay with that. There will not be any new evidence introduced. With that, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Your Mayor, if I may, just and what the body's supposed to decide at the end. And also, all the appellants, they're cautioned to make their arguments basically solely upon the evidence that's already been established in the Board of Adjustments decision. There's no new information allowed and will not be considered by the council. So please keep the arguments to what is in the Board of Adjustments record. And after the council has heard the arguments from the appellants and any, if any, from the respondent, and after review of the record, council shall take one of 3 actions for each appeal. You can sustain the Board of Adjustment decision in whole or in part, or reverse the decision in whole or in part, or you can remand the whole, in whole or in part, back to the Board of Adjustment if an appellant has shown that there is new material information which was not available or could not have easily or readily been discovered at the time of the original Board of Adjustment hearing, and it is in the public interest to develop such additional material evidence. And if the council does remand, council is to direct the Board of Adjustment to gather additional material information and then provide a decision along with a reasoned statement based upon the original and the additional evidence.
Okay, very good. Do you have a question before we go farther?
Yes. I just wanted you to restate what you said about new information that wasn't available. Can you start there?
Yes. If you remand it back, an appellant's going to have to demonstrate that there is new material information that was not available or was not readily or easily available to be discovered at the time of the original Board of Adjustment
in
hearing.
order to remand it back to the BOA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, Ryan.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, members of the community, I'm Ryan Cash, the staff liaison for Community Development and the Board of Adjustments, and I'm going to be going over the appeal process, which includes the presentation provided to the Board of Adjustments originally, as well as the ongoing evolution through the appeals process and ultimately up till tonight. So with that, before you we have the proposal for the conditional use permit. The applicant has applied for a conditional use permit to develop an educational institution located in the Central Business Zoning District in order to develop a musical conservatory to accommodate up to 300 full-time equivalent students and 44 full-time staff and faculty in order to enhance their existing music curriculum. The conditional permitted use within the Central Business Zone includes commercial schools and educational institutions with specific consideration given to traffic, parking, safety, and nuisance issues, as well as cumulative impacts and proximity to existing commercial schools and educational institutions in the vicinity, and the impact on the availability of retail and office space. So the proposed education institution, the proposed class times of this building follow the traditional 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday for educational use. The proposed use will limit total full-time equivalent students to 300 and combine faculty and staff to 44. The proposed facility will include 5 classroom studios, 9 offices, a multi-purpose room, a student lounge, and musical performance space with seating for 680 occupants for a music conservatory, which is an ancillary use. Additional operations include intermittent public concert venues in the evenings and over the weekends. Here we have the subject property. Most everybody within town is familiar with this landmark. It goes by the name of CJ's, as well as the old Elks building, which was the fraternal lodge and the original use of the building. Subject property, as you can see indicated, highlighted in the red periphery, that's the location of the building. We have Main Street to the left side of the property, to the west side of the property. North Washington continues to the east. To the north, we have A Street, and to the south, we have First Street. The subject property is approximately 15,900 square feet and is located on the east side of Main Street, and the parcel has 130 feet of frontage on Main Street, which also has rear alley access. A little bit of continued background. The subject property was first developed as a fraternal lodge. Most recently, it's included bars and nightclubs over the last several decades. And in 2016, the property owner was granted a conditional use permit for ground floor residential use, which the owner did not pursue in the building conversion. And here we have some snapshots of the existing building. Here we have the site and lower floor plan. There's actually 3 stories to this building. This is on the subterranean layer. There's actually a split level on this course, so there's not traditional Main Street frontage. It's a little bit hard to discern, but you can see classrooms to the southwest of the building. We have a lounge area. To the northwest, we have restrooms. There's an existing racquetball court and a proposed exercise room. On the main floor, which is up a series of steps, you can see the arrow pointing to the east. That's the main access to the subject property. On the south, you can see the overall auditorium as well as the performance stage. As you approach up through the stairs, there's also a reception area, restrooms, and a multi-purpose room to the northeast. And on the upper floor plan, we have upper floor seating as well as additional classrooms and multiple utilities and office space. Here we have a digital rendering of the proposed use as provided by the applicant. And we're going to go into zoning. As you can see here, the subject property is highlighted once again. And we essentially have central business zoning. This is the northerly most parcel on the east side of Main Street. Directly to the north, we actually have A Street, which separates our central business zone from motor business. And to the east, we have R4 multifamily, which is separated by South Washington. And directly over to the west, we have residential office right across the street from Jackson. So going into the definition of central business zoning district, the principal purpose of the central business zoning district is to provide a location of groups of compatible commercial uses having the common characteristic of not involving more than an incidental and minimal assembly, fabrication, or storage of commodities. For example, establishments dispensing retail commodities and those providing professional and personal services to the individuals. The Central Business Zoning District is the most intensive commercial zoning district, and to promote pedestrian use, unbroken street-level commercial is encouraged in this zoning district. The Central Business Zone is not subject to a minimum requirement for off-street parking lots, area, or width. There's also varied permitted uses within the Central Business Zone, including entertainment, dancing, and recreation establishments, including restaurants, bars, theaters, video arcades, dance halls, and physical fitness centers. So the surrounding properties are mixed residential and commercial use. We have restaurants to the west and to the south. We have professional and personal service offices to the east. We have multifamily residential structures to the west, and we have vacant, underdeveloped city-owned parcel to the north. As you can see by those previous screenshots of the imagery, we actually had the gravel parking lot, which is a triangular parking lot. That's actually under city ownership. Existing building is also initially developed as a fraternal lodge in the building. The main floor level is located 6.5 feet above adjacent sidewalk on the main street, with the majority of the main floor windows filled in and above average height for pedestrians on the street. Basement windows at the lower level are present in the lower portion of the building, and the building does not appear to be well suited for ground floor retail use as determined by the board through the previous 2016 ground floor residential CUP approval. Here we have some photos of the access. The image to the top of the screen actually shows the 20-foot alley access, and the image to the bottom of the screen includes the city lot with the only curb cut access. There's actually no curb cuts existing to this property. It's only accessible via the city's property. There's also on-street parking available. Restrictions also vary for parking, with some limited 3-hour parking during the daytime and overnight parking restrictions. Included is the regulated downtown parking zone. So the dashed areas, as indicated in green, indicate the 3-hour limited parking with overnight parking permitted, and the orange dashed lines actually indicate the 3-hour parking zone with no overnight parking permitted. Well, so going into this, we actually have specific considerations that we need to take into account for the traffic, parking, and safety and nuisance issues. So as staff, we gathered counts near the site recorded in 2016, which averaged 2,666 vehicles per day. And according to the Institute of Transportation Engineers, the TRIMP generated manual, proposed student enrollment could result in an estimated vehicle volume of an increase of 714 vehicle trips per day, or 63 vehicles during the AM and PM peak hours. The IT trip generation is based upon 7 traffic studies provided upon universities with average student enrollments of 3,002 students, so caution should be applied to applying these traffic generation factors to the proposed use. Furthermore, Moscow is generally viewed as a very walkable and bike-friendly community. This U.S. Census American Data Survey from 2008 to 2012 reported that 20.2% of residents walked as their primary means of transportation to work, ranking 11th in the U.S. among small cities with populations between 20,000 and 99,999. 5.7% of those residents bicycled as their primary means of transportation to work, representing a total non-motorized mode shift of 25.9%. So we're going to go a little bit further with the parking. The subject property is located within the central business district where off-street parking is not required. Again, the city parking schedule includes a parking requirement for educational institution, which specifies 1 parking space for each faculty or staff member and 1 parking space for each 5 students. Again, this is outside of the central business zone. For the current proposed use, at the proposed maximum enrollment of 300 students and 44 faculty, that off-street parking requirement would equal a total of 104 total spaces if the use were located in any zoning district other than central business. Staff explored 3 different parking demand scenarios that would likely result from the common permitted use within the central business district. So scenario 1 takes into account the prior use as a nightclub. Prior use would equal roughly 127 spaces, which include primarily a nighttime demand with limited daytime use. Scenario 2 includes residential conversion from the priorly approved CUP, and the residential conversion would equal 38 spaces, which includes a large overnight demand with mixed daytime demand. And scenario 3 would be a conversion to mixed commercial and office. Then the mixture of retail and office use includes 57 spaces, mainly daytime demand with some evening demand possible. So in consideration of that stated intent and purpose of the central business district, the third scenario most closely represents the anticipated use and the resulting off-street parking demand. The proposed education institution should have a parking demand of 47 spaces beyond that of the reasonably anticipated principal use within the central business zone that staff recommended should be considered for mitigation, i.e. scenario 3. So safety. The subject property is served by fully improved streets with sidewalks and marked crosswalks on adjacent and surrounding intersections. No specific safety concerns have been identified by Public Works, police, or the fire departments. And the nuisance issues, the applicant proposes to hire a sound engineer to mitigate the impact of the conservatory and to maximize acoustics. And the board did not identify any other anticipated nuisances related to the proposed use. So City Code directs consideration of cumulative impacts of and proximity to existing schools, commercial schools, and educational institutions in the vicinity of the educational institution. Code does not define the distance to be considered within the vicinity of the proposed use, and the following existing schools and educational institutions and their distance to the proposed use listed below it are identified and attached upon the map. Russell Elementary is located 562 feet east of the subject property. New St. Andrews College, the existing campus, is located 991 feet to the south of the subject property. Moscow High School is located 1,071 feet to the southeast of the subject property. And the University of Idaho is located 2,210 feet to the southwest of the subject property. Finally, West Park Elementary is located 2,522 feet to the southwest of the subject property. So as you can see, we have the identified locations on the map. We have the subject property right there, Russell School. There's the high school, the existing NSA campus. All of these properties are included along the frontage of the university, and then West Park School right over here. So we also look at the area of parking impact. The staff conducted a parking survey over a period of 5 days, starting on April 3rd through April 11th, to assess the availability of public parking stalls located within 600 feet, with counts taken at 9 a.m. in the morning and 2 p.m. in the afternoon. There is a total of 169 total public parking stalls, which were identified within the 600 linear feet of the subject property, and that area is roughly from C Street to 3rd and Jefferson to Jackson. During the survey period, the average number of parking spaces that were available included 9 a.m. with average was 91, or a total of 54% of the 169 spaces. 2 p.m. included 82, or 48% of the overall 169 spaces. And also during this review, it appeared that the cumulative impacts upon which parking were likely to occur included the use of New St. Andrews College and Russell Elementary. The CUP for the existing New St. Andrews College did require that the applicant provide 42 off-street parking spaces to mitigate the impact upon public parking. Staff did not identify any additional cumulative impacts that had not already been incorporated in the specific assessment, and consideration of these impacts already addressed within the staff report. The board evaluated the potential cumulative impacts, and the majority of the board determined that the required off-street parking as condition of the approval would sufficiently mitigate the cumulative impacts upon the public parking. So as we look at the parking, we're moving on now to commercial impact. The total potential retail office frontage of the subject property is 131 linear feet. Again, I admitted that I erroneously reported 170 linear feet within the staff report and during the time of the hearing. The total available retail office frontage in the central business zone, excluding existing public assigned parking areas, is equal to 18,246 linear feet. That's less than 1% reduction of potential retail or office frontage, which would be displaced by the proposed use. As noted previously, the subject building is not well suited to retail due to the vertical separation within the street level. Existing land areas dedicated to commercial schools and educational institutions currently occupy 2.1% of the central business district land area. Within the addition of the proposed property, commercial schools and educational institutions, their uses would occupy 3.4% of the total land area of the central business district. So the Board of Adjustment's determination. The Board of Adjustment conducted a public hearing on April 25th, 2017 regarding the proposed educational institution and approved the CUP application with the following conditions. Number one, the applicant would be required to provide 47 off-street parking spaces within approximately 1/2 mile of the subject property, subject to the approval of the zoning administrator. And number two, the applicant shall be allowed to phase in off-street parking requirement by providing 50% of the required parking mitigation upon occupancy of the building, and the remaining 50% to be provided when enrollment of the educational institution's use upon the subject property reaches 150 full-time students as enrolled under the education programs offered upon the subject property, or 5 years passes from the date of the issuance of certificate of occupancy of the vehicle or of the building, whichever comes first. So the Board of Adjustment conducted a public meeting on May 1st, 2017 regarding New St. Andrews College approved CUP application to review and approve the reasoning statement of relevant criteria and standards. And on May 1st, 2017, the Board of Adjustments voted to approve the draft minutes in the RCS with amendments. Following that, on May 3rd of the same week, the Board of Adjustment chairman signed the final minutes in the RCS as approved by the BOA during the May 1st meeting, which began a 10-day appeal period. During the 10-day appeal period, 5 appeals were received. The first appeal was received May 10th, 2017 from Ryan Pilgrim. Later on that afternoon, on May 10th, 2017, the appeal from Leontina Hormel. On the May 11th, we received our third appeal from Tina Hilding. And on May 12th in the morning, we received our 4th appeal from John Davis. And later on after that afternoon, we received our 5th appeal from David Hall. So here we are. That brings us to our City Council meeting. This appeal proceeding has been noticed as a public meeting to inform the public that the council shall not act on an appeal which differs materially from which was considered by the Board of Adjustments. When considering the merits of an appeal, no additional public testimony or information shall be taken or considered by the council. Then the appellants and applicant will have each been informed, and the appellant will have 5 minutes to present their appeal, and the applicant will then have 15 minutes for rebuttal. City Council will then deliberate and take action on each appeal separately. Council's action is to conduct the appeal proceeding, including individual representations of the appellant arguments and applicant's rebuttal, and for each individual appeal request, they may either sustain the decision in whole or in part, or reverse the decision in whole and in part, or remand the decision in whole and in part to the board with comments and or instructions for further consideration by the board, or remand the decision in whole and in part for the board to gather for further information, where the appellants show the council by preponderance of evidence that this information is not available at the time of the final decision, and it's in the public's interest to develop such additional information on this matter. Again, we have the final definition of the commercial school and education institution as conditionally permitted within the Central Business District. And at this time, Mr. Mayor, City Council, the floor is back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. And I think we will move on as we're going. I'll remind all appellants that we will give them 5 minutes to read their letter to us. And please stay within the context. As everybody knows, there will be no new evidence or information other than what was in that public hearing. So we will start with Ryan Pilgrim, if you'd please come up. And I'd like each appellant to state their name in case I pronounced it wrong, and give us your address, if you would, please.
All right, you said it perfectly.
Oh,
so
well, thank
nice
you.
Work.
Could you lower the microphone, ma'am?
Is that better?
Yep.
Can you hear me now? All right. My name is Ryan Pilgrim. My address is 102 South Howard Street in Moscow. All right. So first, I'd like to thank each of you for hearing my appeal. I appreciate your service in our community and your time this evening. I'm appealing as an affected person living within a half mile of the proposed college. My appeal addresses issues related specifically to parking and, by extension, then criteria 7, the cumulative impact regarding parking. Tonight, I will briefly outline the 4 primary reasons I believe the conditional use permit should be remanded to the Board of Adjustment. Full details regarding each argument are outlined in the letter I submitted. First, the board did not have sufficient data. As noted at the April 25th hearing, staff provided parking data obtained at 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. over a 5-day period. Commissioners expressed the desire to also have had midday parking. I agree with the commissioners. The data should have included other critical windows of time, including the lunch hour, school and daycare drop-off hours, and the evening rush hour, and contend that insufficient information prevented the board from accurately assessing the current parking demands downtown. Second, other data were incorrect. At the board meeting, NSA claimed that the percentage of the Central Business District dedicated to educational use was 3.4%. However, that number does not include the square footage of existing New St. Andrews parking lot at 6th and Jackson, rendering the figure presented for approval to the board incorrect. The board should reconsider the conditional use permit with correct data that accurately represents the existing percentage of Central Business District dedicated to educational purposes, and then allow those data to inform any predictions for future use. Third, the meeting minutes note that the staff compared the potential parking needs for the proposed college to 3 things: its prior use as a dance hall and bar, its approved residential conversion that was not carried out, and the parking requirements for a mixture of retail and office space use. This comparison is misleading. People who go to bars and dance halls drive at night, if they drive at all, and they park accordingly. Downtown residents don't require parking accommodations, and even if they did, the small number of units in the building would mean a relatively small impact on parking. And finally, the parking requirements for a mixture of retail and office space are explicitly in line with the comprehensive plan. In all cases, parking requirements for these groups are different than parking requirements for an educational institution, and comparing them is misleading. For an accurate assessment, the board must consider the current parking impact of other schools in the Central Business District. Board of Adjustment member Jerry Long asked if data existed on current NSA parking impacts because this proposal would double those effects. But the city staff didn't have that data. Comparing dissimilar, inaccurate information while lacking similar, accurate data prevented the board from making a fully informed decision. The fourth and final reason for my appeal is the Board of Adjustment's calculations for mitigating the parking impacts. I believe they should be reconsidered. The board approved the conditional use permit under the following conditions. The NSA provide 47 off-street parking spaces within a half mile of the proposed college, with that number phased in over 5 years depending on enrollment. For context, that means NSA will only need to provide 23.5 parking spots for up to 194 people for 5 years. In addition, parking in any dedicated New St. Andrews lot cannot be mandated for students, and students will likely choose the closest spot to their destination in the central business district. The decision to approve the conditional use permit is one of considerable magnitude and should be considered with access to full information. In closing, the proposal did not satisfy criterion 7, quote, that the proposed use will not be in conflict with the comprehensive plan. When asked about the college's plan to find parking for students, NSA President Ben Merkel responded, quote, some of it would be accommodated in the existing lot and that they were negotiating other locations that weren't appropriate to divulge at this time. Without knowing where that parking would be, the board, by definition, cannot know the cumulative impact on the central business district. The board has made many thoughtful deliberations, and I appreciate their service, but they deliberated on insufficient and incorrect information. The proposals written did not satisfy criterion 4 regarding parking, and therefore, by definition, cannot satisfy criterion 7, the cumulative impact. I request a remand to the Board of Adjustment because having full and accurate information when making these kind of decisions is in the best interest of the public. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Pilgrim, for the information. Questions for this lady before I go to the next? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, appellant letter number 2 is from Leontina Hormel, and she cannot be with us here tonight. She requested that we have a designated person, William Beck, to read her letter into the record, and we have approved this. So, sir, identify your name and your address, if you would, sir.
Yes, my name is William Beck. I reside at 4581 Estes Road, Pullman, Washington.
Okay.
Thanks, Ryan. Mr. Mayor, council members, staff, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for hearing this appeal submitted by Leontina Hormel. I direct your attention to the site and main floor plan on the screen. Please note that the auditorium composes a very substantial percentage of this plan. This appeal provides 2 separate but intrinsically linked options for the board's consideration. First, this appeal commends the council to reverse the decision of the Board of Adjustment, deny the current application, begin the process of amending the zoning code, and decide whether large-scale auditoriums and similar large-scale developments are appropriate uses in the central business district. Auditoriums and conference centers are not listed as permitted uses in the CBD under MCC 435B or conditional uses under MCC 435D. The appellant urges the council to address this omission. The basis for this appeal was identified in the comments of the City of Moscow's Public Works Department regarding this application. I quote, patrons of the auditorium will be reliant on public parking on the city streets, as are other businesses within the central business district. The proposed development will add competition with the patrons of other businesses and downtown residents for the available public spaces near the building during events in the auditorium. The applicant believes that all affected persons, including the public at large, should have the opportunity to participate in a discussion about the impact on the CBD and adjoining zones of large-scale development, specifically auditoriums and conference centers, proposed to be located in the CBD. We ask the council to consider, if this decision by the Board of Adjustment is not reversed, Will there be sufficient restrictions on this 680-seat auditorium's use day or night, weekends or weekdays, even during farmers market? This appeal also presents a second option for the council's consideration. The appellant commends the council to reverse the decision of the Board of Adjustment regarding off-street parking and incorporate the parking mitigation requirements consistent with the Moscow City Code. MCC 436D8 requires that consideration be given to, among other issues, parking, traffic, and safety impacts of the proposed use. While the Planning Division considered parking impacts of the educational aspect of the proposed use, they did not consider the impact of the auditorium. Please keep in mind this is a 680-seat auditorium. This is large. The impact of the auditorium should have been considered. This is implicit in MCC 465C1E, which recognizes that off-street parking must be provided for according to the schedule for an auditorium incidental to a school. The Planning Division used the parking schedule contained in MCC 465E to calculate mitigation required under the permit, and they did not include the impacts of the auditorium. Using the method adopted by planners, an additional 227 spaces would be required to mitigate the impact of the auditorium on downtown parking. Considering that the auditorium could operate concurrently or independently of NSA, it seems clear that a total of 274 off-street parking spaces should be required to mitigate the total cumulative impact of the proposed use. Thank you for your consideration of this appeal. I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Questions? Okay, we will move on. Thank you, sir. We will go to appellant letter number 3, which is Tina Hilding. Tina, please come up.
My name is Tina Hilding, and I live at 411 North Howard Street in Fort Russell, which falls within the half-mile radius of the proposed parking for the project. Mayor Lambert and members of the City Council, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I am appealing the CUP because the Board of Adjustment did not adequately consider the proposed uses conflict with the city's comprehensive plan or the cumulative impacts of adding an additional educational institution in Moscow CBD as was required. As we all do, I truly love Moscow and its downtown. In your deliberations this evening, I ask that you consider just how special this community is. Many small towns in our region and across the country struggle with downtowns that are shuttered, and there are very few with thriving downtowns. We're pretty rare. And this was not an accident. Moscow has made many important land use decisions that have helped the community thrive. We all appreciate the terrific community that our Moscow leaders envisioned and created over several generations of leadership. In particular, city leaders carefully protected the downtown area as its most intensive commercial zone, unquote. They decided to keep downtown for commercial, retail, and residential uses, and with one exception in 2008, to keep educational uses outside the CBD. At the April 25th CUP hearing, the Board of Adjustment had insufficient information and was unable to adequately consider 2 points for this important land use decision. Specifically, 1, as outlined in the relevant criteria and standards, the proposed use should be consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. At the April 25th hearing, Tim Edwards, NSA Dean of Students, outlined a vision for Moscow's downtown that directly conflicts with the city's comprehensive plan. He said NSA envisions Moscow becoming like Oxford, England, and that education should take place in the community, not cut off from it. He added that he was excited to see NSA become, quote, established in downtown Moscow. In its application in regards to Criterion 7, NSA only said that they proposed to significantly enhance the, quote, cultural environment, unquote, of Moscow and the CBD. Such a vision in Moscow would dramatically transform the economic potential of downtown from the way it is described in the current comprehensive plan. That is, the downtown is meant as a location for, quote, dining, entertainment, and specialty retail, unquote, as well as a center of gravity for target industries of financial services, healthcare, real estate, and tourism. The board did not adequately consider this large contradiction of NSA's expansion plan and the vision of the city's comprehensive plan as required by Criteria 7 of the relevant criteria and standards. 2, the cumulative impacts of an additional education institution in the CBD as required by Moscow City Code. NSA started in 1994, eventually purchasing property and moving into Friendship Square in 2003. At that time, educational uses were not allowed in the CBD, and NSA became the first educational institution to receive such a conditional use permit 5 years later in 2008. At that time, the city limited enrollment to 200 students due to, quote, parking and other issues, unquote. At the April 25th hearing, there was no discussion regarding the cumulative impacts of more than doubling the enrollment, and specifically why the enrollment in the first CUP was limited. The board did not discuss how the additional students will move back and forth between the two campuses, which could affect compliance with the first CUP. There was no discussion regarding the enrollment numbers and number of educational institutions that might be appropriate for the CBD. There was incomplete information on NSA's parking footprint and its impact on the availability of retail and office space. Finally, the board did not fully consider the impact of permanently removing potential commercial, residential, and retail space from the CBD, particularly at a time when the CBD is growing and thriving. The proposed use would preclude the potential opportunity for future retail, office, or residential use in that space. Because these two important considerations were overlooked, I would request that the council remand the CUP application back to the board so they can further consider, 1, the cumulative impacts of an additional education institution in the CBD, and 2, its compliance with the city's comprehensive plan. I would welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hilding. Okay, we will go on to appellant letter number 4, which is John Davis.
Dear Mayor and Councilors, this letter serves to appeal the Moscow Board of Adjustment's decision to approve a conditional use permit for 112 North Main Street as applied for by New St. Andrews College. In particular, several procedural questions were raised during the CUP review process that bears examination. At the April 25th meeting and the BOA decision, 5 of 7 board members were present, with 3 voting affirmatively to approve the CUP, effectively meeting quorum. As governed by the Moscow City Code, the board may take action without all members of the board present. However, a decision such as this, which represents a significant change to the central business district and very well may have far-reaching impacts on future development, is best served by full participation by all members of the board. Statute 3-5D.8 states that, quote, all applications for educational institutions shall be accompanied by detailed written description of plans including present student enrollment, staff on site, staff development, future enrollment growth, and any phasing thereof, end quote. The conditional use permit submitted by NSA College did not, in fact, and could not include these figures, therefore should not have advanced to the hearing process. The burden of proof falls on New St. Andrews to show that their application should be approved, not on the opponents to show why it should not be permitted. For this reason alone, the decision should be remanded to the board for reconsideration. Several important issues clearly require examination and, importantly, consideration. At the beginning of the meeting, Ryan Cash opened the orientation with a PowerPoint slide that listed 7 fundamental criteria apparently designed by the board to orchestrate foci on critical issues by which to base acceptance or rejection decision. In particular, a majority of persons speaking in support of the CUP did not address these criteria at all, which may have influenced board members' interpretations of the merit of the proposed CUP. The decision to approve the CUP is one with lasting implications for the Moscow community and should be made with full access to all relevant information and with full participation of the board as possible. Unfortunately, this did not happen, and the decision should be remanded to the board for reconsideration. Further, it should be noted that the board members themselves asked staff for additional information on several points and additional time to consider during the April 25th meeting, yet proceeded to vote that evening regardless. In addition, on the meeting of the board dated May 1st, Board member Lorene Sorensen requested that the approval of the reasoned statement be postponed until such time that she and Annette Bagler-Lamadrid, with the help of city staff, could resolve technical difficulties that prevented them from accessing audio and video of the April 25th meeting. This motion failed to carry and was effectively denied. In this day and age of effective at-distance connectivity, dismissal of the potential inclusion of 2/7 of the board members appears to be an egregious act on the part of the other 5 board members. Of particular...
Excuse me one moment.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
This next paragraph you're about to read, I have reviewed the Board of Adjustment hearing. That information was not provided in the record.
Okay.
And so it's not relevant. So I'd ask that the board or the council members strike that paragraph from your appellate letter. And if you just skip over to the next one, you'll be fine.
Yeah. No worries.
You can,
I kind of assumed that.
We'll restart you, Mr. Davis.
Pardon me?
Go ahead, continue,
Okay,
please.
thank you. Finally, the handling of emails and communications from citizens submitted to the Board of Adjustments for consideration violated ex parte contact. Board of Adjustment Chair Joe Bozzoli stated that while he himself read the emails that were received from concerned parties after the 5-day cutoff period, he did not share them with the rest of the board. One member of the board cannot vote without information the other board members do not have. As Idaho Public Service Handbook states, when a matter is quasi-judicial in nature, such an application for rezoning or for subdivision, such an ex parte contact has the effect of compromising the decision-maker's ability to make an informed and impartial decision based upon the information contained in the formal record. According to ex parte, either all members of the board should have read the emails, or no members of the board should have read the emails. This is especially important in decisions such as these, which represent significant potential changes to the CBD. As the IPSH continues, the rule, quote, the rule prohibiting ex parte contact in quasi-judicial matters comes from the expectation that the decision makers should weigh only the evidence and issues formally before them and should not take into consideration personal matters or private influence as these taint the process of fair decision. Additionally, the public perception of that matter considered by the decision makers as being treated in a fair and even-handed manner without regard to the individual participants is important to preserving the legitimacy of the process. The overriding principle is fairness to those affected by the decision. End quote. These comments illustrate the necessity of having as fair and balanced a process as possible, which is not evidenced by the proceedings of the board regarding unequal access to emailed comments by the public. Similarly, the board's decision to recess to omit emailed comments, despite previously committing to reading them, raising questions of procedure. As this was a public meeting and not an executive session, this decision should not have been made in private. In conclusion, while the board has made a considered decision with good intentions regarding this CUP, the procedural questions brought forth regarding the overall application and the approval process and subsequent result clearly demonstrate the need for the decision to be remanded back to the board for consideration. Thank you for your time and consideration. Respectfully, me.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Mr. Davis, could you give us your address? I'm sorry we missed it.
Oh, I'm sorry. 951 South Meadow Street.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, appellant letter number 5, David Hall.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. David Hall, 1334 Wallen Road, Moscow. I'm assuming you've read the written petition, and it's rather long. I will skip over some high point or cover some high points. Considerable time was given to deliberating parking issues during the Board of Adjustment hearing on April 25th, but board decisions were based on incomplete and arguably faulty data. Safety and nuisance issues were brushed aside. Some cumulative impacts were considered, but the analysis was inadequate. Various instances of lacking or inaccurate information upon which to base a decision on this conditional use permit application were documented during the April 25th Board of Adjustment hearing. Due to this and other issues, The Moscow City Council should find that there is new material information which was not available at the time of the board's decision, and that it is in the public interest to develop such information, and therefore remand the conditional use permit application back to the Board of Adjustment for reconsideration. Moscow City Code requires that the conditional use permit application in question not be considered in a vacuum. Thus, its effect on the applicant's current conditional use permit property should have been reviewed. One of the imposed conditions for the CUP, that earlier one, is that the maximum number of full-time equivalent students shall not exceed 200. According to Mr. Merkel's testimony, for the current conditional use permit application, students are to use both campuses. The conditional use permit application in question proposes to triple the current student population of the college. This should have been addressed in the current conditional use permit application. Relevant criteria and standards criterion number 7, it's up there, that the proposed use will not be in conflict with the comprehensive plan, is not upheld by the granting of this conditional use permit. The proposed use for this application would not help to maintain a viable central business district. It would remove potential retail space from downtown. Moscow City Code directs that consideration be given to the impact of educational institutions upon the availability of retail and office space, especially at street level. The board noted that the subject building is not currently, nor is it known that it has ever been utilized for retail or office uses. That observation is irrelevant and should not be the basis for permitting. The code does not say that it applies only if the previous use was for retail or office purposes. It applies regardless. The board should consider whether this application would be granted with the liberal conditions they impose for Boise State University, North Idaho College, or the UI, the applicant. Would they then consider how many students can or should downtown accommodate at the expense of retail, entertainment, and office uses, the main purpose for the central business district? In noting two inadequacies, Board of Adjustment member Long emphasized that, quote, the record did not include in the assessment of space utilized by educational institutions the existing NSA parking lot, which is at 6th and Jackson Streets. Long suggested that since it is part of the existing facility and required to be part of that facility, that it should have been included in the educational uses downtown. That was at the May 1 meeting. Noting another inadequacy in the record, Long emphasized that he didn't think that the board could satisfy the relevant criteria and standards with the information before them. The conditional use permit application should go back to the Board of Adjustment because they lack necessary information and had incorrect data on its effect on the comprehensive plan. For parking, Long asked whether data existed on current New St. Andrews parking impacts because this proposal would double the effect. Staff did not have that data. It was reported in the hearing. Board member Long stated that he had concerns with the criteria number 4, parking, and number 7, compliance with the comp plan, because creating more parking to satisfy criteria number 4 conflicts with criterion number 7, especially if other businesses, buildings, and lots are purchased to accomplish this goal. Board member Long argued that the board must assess what the applicant proposes in order to decide on the cumulative effect. In Dr. Seussian fashion, the applicant testified that they would not provide information on their proposal for parking. Mr. Long noted that, quote, we didn't do the traffic study at the time. I thought we should do it. We don't know how much space they're already taking, so we don't know what the parking needs should be. And then if we decide we know what the parking needs should be and try to remedy it, we don't know where it's going to be, so we don't know. In fact, we don't know if it's going to satisfy the needs in number 4. And if it's downtown, we don't know how it conflicts with number 7, end quote.
Mr. Hall, you're running out of time, sir.
Okay. Board member Joe Bazzoli not only noted that they don't know exactly how many parking stalls there will be, and therefore there will be an unknown effect. And board member Marshall Comstock noted that even if the board assumes 47 parking spots is sufficient, they don't know where they will be. Would they be downtown? And how would those parking spots affect Central Business District? I had some concerns on safety, but could have read those.
David, I need you to, and to be fair to everybody, on all those appellant letters before you, I'm going to stop you.
Okay. In closing, I request that, again, the new material was not available and that you remand back to the Board of Adjustment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Okay, now we will hear from the applicant. And you have 15 minutes, sir. Please state your name and address for us and your title, if you would, sir.
All right. My name is Ben Merkel. I'm president of New St. Andrews College. My address is 528 East 1st Street. I have more than fits at this podium. So I'm asked to respond to each of the appellants here, and so I'm not sure quite how this goes together. I got to weave through a number of them, bring up the same thing a few times. So I'm going to try to hit the major points that they bring up. There will probably be a few smaller points that I'm not able to get to. If there's anything I've missed, I know you're free to ask me questions later on in the deliberation, and I would welcome that. So first of all, let me thank you, members of the City Council, Mr. Mayor, for taking the time to review this matter. You're being asked this evening to review the Board of Adjustment's granting of a CUP to New St. Andrews College for the use of the old Cadillac Jacks building as an educational institution. And I think the various appeals, one of the things that you'll see throughout is the allegation that the city staff did an inadequate job of preparing the case for the BOA, and that there is new information or that there was incorrect information. There's new information that should have been there that they didn't hear, or that there was incorrect information that they were fed, and that's why you ought to send this back to the BOA. I think it's important that we distinguish between the BOA not having correct information and the BOA having the info that not having the info that the appellants wanted them to have. Okay, there's a big difference between those two. If the Board of Adjustment had the info that they want and it was correct and made the determination, that's different than the Board of Adjustment not having additional facts that some of the appellants wanted them to consider. Let me give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. The claim is that the BOA did not adequately consider the fact that granting NSA a CUP on this property would mean that it could not be used for retail space. That was presented as they were missing information. Mr. Hall says that this shows that the BOA did not have information about the city's comprehensive plan. The city's code and comprehensive plan both urge the BOA to protect street-level retail, and I think we saw that in a number of the comments just now. However, as the city staff has made it clear, CJ's does not have any street-level space and is ill-suited for retail. And CJ's has already been given a CUP to be converted entirely into apartments with no retail space whatsoever. That was on January 6, 2016. And it was specially noted at this hearing by both the city staff and the BOA members that this building does not work well for retail. Linda Paul welcomed a non-retail use for this building because she said it had struggled for over 20 years to find a good use. This was before the BOA, and all of this was brought up again during our hearing. They talked about it quite a bit. And what's interesting is no one appeared at the earlier when a CUP was filed to convert this entirely to apartments. Nobody appeared at that hearing to contest it, and the CUP was passed unanimously. There was no contest when it was being converted to apartments, completely removing it from retail space. The BOA was fully aware of this question and simply ruled in a manner that is unfavorable to some of the appellants. It's not that they lacked any of the information. That information was discussed quite a bit. Another example, it's alleged that the BOA voted on incorrect data because and it was mentioned that NSA had supplied the number of 3.4%, that the square footage in the CB is 3.4% educational institution. That was not supplied by NSA. That was supplied by the city. And it's alleged that the BOA, in using that number, was acting on incorrect information. However, the BOA, and the reason it's alleged it was incorrect was because 3.4% does not include the square footage of the parking lot that NSA owns on the Jackson Street parking lot. So our current CUP requires that we have 42 parking space, and we get most of that from that Jackson Street lot. So that square footage is not included in the 3.4% number that was thrown out. However, the BOA knew that this number did not include the parking lot. That was talked about for quite a while. They weren't deceived or tricked or acting on inaccurate information because they knew 3.4 referred not to the parking lot. They were aware of what data they were working with and considered it adequate for the determination that they were making. That was a judgment by the BOA that that was adequate information. And additionally, I would just point out that since we're speaking about use and not ownership, at NSA, we don't teach classes in that parking lot. We park there. Okay, so because we're talking about use and not ownership, I think the city staff was right to not count that as an educational facility. So it's not the case that the BOA acted on incorrect data. They had the data they wanted to make the vote that they made. The appellants are not actually identifying missing information, but merely identifying another place where they disagree with the decisions of the Board of Adjustment. Mr. Davis has argued that the vote needs to happen again because not all 7 members of the Board of Adjustment were there for the night of the hearing. However, the code says this. This is Title 3, Chapter 1, 1.4. The presence of 3 members shall be necessary to constitute a quorum, and 3 affirmative votes shall be necessary for granting a variance or conditional use permit. We followed the law. We followed the code. We've met everything. It's just simply a disagreement with the actual outcome of the vote, or wanting a do-over. The city did a thorough and, I think, professional job in preparing traffic studies for the Board of Adjustment hearing. The Board of Adjustment considered the amount of information that was supplied, and they did debate over whether more information was necessary. You'll notice in all of the appeals, they mention other things that they think that the BOA should have been considering. Each of those was brought up in the BOA hearing. Mr. Long said, should we ask for this? Should we ask for this? In the end, after hearing all the other things that they could ask for, 3 members of the BOA still voted, no, we have enough information, and passed it. So you can say that there are all kinds of other studies that they could have done, but they considered that and passed it. I appreciated that we were clarified at the beginning that the City Council isn't attempting to substitute your judgment for the Board of Adjustment's judgment. I think that that's what you're being asked to do, to step in and tell the Board of Adjustment, your judgment here that this information is enough was wrong, and you need to actually go back and do other things. The appellants are arguing that the BOA was wrong and need to do more traffic surveys. They're wanting a do-over of the BOA's vote. David Hall's appeal indicates that he wants a study that covers lunch traffic, after-school traffic, morning rush hour, evening business rush hour, evening traffic from cultural events, Friday evening traffic as distinct from the others, Saturday evening traffic as distinct from the others. He would also like a separate survey of pedestrian traffic. Ryan Pilgrim wants a study to go for longer than 5 days. So you're getting a number of things, other homework assignments that the BOA could have done. The BOA considered those and felt like they had enough information to vote. And I do think that what's being asked here, it would be an onerous workload to put on the city staff, which has already done, I think, a great job on this review. A few just miscellaneous things that I would note. One thing that was brought up a few times is the perceived conflict between number 4 and number 7 of the city's criteria and standards for the CUP. The concern is that there would be an unintended consequence for requiring NSA to supply parking. So you say, well, we need extra parking if you're going to have this facility, so we got to have this big parking lot over here. But as soon as you require the parking, the 47 parking spots, you don't know what kind of impact you will have made on the city by doing it. So that's pitched as a bit of a catch-22. But this ignores the fact that any purchase of a parking lot that NSA makes to fulfill the requirement of the CUP will still have to be subject to all the requirements of the city zoning code. Right? If NSA buys a new parking lot, it will need to be in a zone that expressly permits it. Or, and it was mentioned that Mr. Long was saying, well, if it ends up being in the center of the business district, how do we know that it's going to not destroy the flavor of the town? Well, I can't put a parking lot in the middle of the central business district without a CUP. It will either, any parking lot that NSA builds or purchases would have to either be in a zone that expressly permits it, Or if it's in a zone that doesn't expressly permit it, we will have to get a CUP for it. And the city will have a chance to steer that and direct it. And you'll have the chance to assess its impact. Just a side note, when NSA was given the CUP for the current building that we were in, we were required to provide 42 parking spaces somewhere, and this was interesting, the city said somewhere within the city limits. 42 parking spaces somewhere within the city limits. NSA could have rented those spaces as far away as Walmart if we had wanted. We could have done that and said we've fulfilled the letter of the law and there's nothing the city could do about it. However, we purchased and began paving the Jackson Street lot immediately across from NSA so that it would really fully fulfill not just a letter, but the spirit of the requirement that the city was putting on us. And when Main Street is closed down for the farmers market on Saturdays, and the city loses 59 parking spaces that are on Main Street because that's where farmers market, NSA opens up 62 spaces in the lot immediately opposite for the city to use, and we open that up for the city. It would be our desire, if the CUP that we've been given seems to be a totally reasonable and workable one, that we think that we can fulfill all the requirements in it. And it would be our desire that as we seek to fulfill the requirements in that CUP, to fulfill the spirit of the requirement as well as the letter, and to make it be something that serves the needs of the city. One of the things that was noted was that concert halls are not permitted by right. 4.3.5B4 permits by right entertainment, dancing, and recreation establishments, including restaurants, bars, theaters, video arcades, dance halls, and physical fitness centers. A concert hall is an entertainment venue that falls right in the middle of that definition. This building has been a concert hall for over a century. That's what this has been. It's hosted concerts performed by Frank Sinatra, Benny Goodman, and Glenn Miller. If concerts are no longer going to be permitted in the Central Business District, will we be sending the Jazz Festival elsewhere? Do we not consider that something that belongs downtown? It was concerned that if we fill out the concert hall with a bunch of, fill out those seats with a bunch of people coming to downtown, we will have killed retail business downtown. But I'm sorry, if you go to a concert, you go out for dinner. We will be bringing business to downtown with that concert hall. A few things. Mr. Davis said that our filing did not include a written description of plans, projected enrollment growth, and proposed phasing in of enrollment growth and of parking. I have no idea what he's talking about. Review our application. That's exactly what we provide in our application. A few times there were suspicions that somehow by starting this at CJ's we will become in violation of our current CUP at the current location. We're doing nothing to change our current CUP. It's in effect. We're capped at 200 students there, and we plan to continue to honor that restriction. I don't know how we would be in any way violating our current CUP or doing anything that would run afoul of that. Closing, I'd like to just note one other reoccurring theme that goes throughout the appeals that you've received. There's a concern in most of the appeals expressed on behalf of the businesses that are in the central business zone. This idea Moscow has something special in the central business zone, and we don't want to mess that up. And first of all, let me just say completely, I think downtown Moscow is fantastic. And as I said at the BOA hearing, if I ask an NSA student, you ask any NSA student, and we do this all the time for recruitment purposes and that sort of thing, what is it about coming to NSA? What's the thing that most stands out? They will always say, and it's 99% of the time, they will say community. They love being a part of this community. They love being downtown. They love being able to go to the coffee shops, to eat burgers at Humble Burger, to go to Casa. They love being a part of downtown. And we deliberately do not do dorms. We don't do food services or anything like that. We want our students to be a part of downtown. So I wouldn't want to do anything that jeopardized the vibrant downtown community of Moscow. I think it's a valid concern that we want to protect that unique feel, and I think it is the job of the BOA to be protecting downtown business development. I say amen to all of that. But I think it's telling that if you go back and review the COP hearing, that everyone who spoke up at the hearing representing a business from within the central business zone, and there were a number of them, quite a few of the people that were there had businesses in the central business zone. And everyone that represented one of those businesses spoke in favor of this CUP. It was a very strong public businesses supporting what we're doing. They see NSA students. They see the economic benefit of what we're doing. They see it as something that is positive. And I think that you should contrast that with the fact that not one of the appeals that are before you is from a downtown business owner. All right? They're not downtown business owners saying this is going to damage my business. They were there actually in favor of it. I think the concern for business is a legitimate one. We need to protect downtown businesses and the prosperity and growth of our central business zone. But the remodeling of CJ's will be good for downtown business, and I think most of downtown actually sees it that way. And I think one of the just a quick note in wrapping it up, these appeals, I think they don't just attempt to block NSA's purchase of CJ's. I do think that they will set up a roadblock that for future development. Take, for instance, the demands for traffic studies that I listed for you earlier that was included in these appeals. I think this list of studies, if this is the list of studies that has to be performed for everybody that's going to start a new business, I think you're setting a precedent for the city staff that would hinder future economic development. And I would suggest that these appeals propose a level of bureaucratic reporting that would stifle business in our downtown. I think the Board of Adjustment and the city staff both worked excellently to review all of the relevant information and to give a very professional determination. It wasn't exactly what NSA asked for. We asked for less parking. There were a few things that we thought should be different, but the Board of Adjustment, I still think, made a great determination. They tweaked a few things from what we had, and we're really happy with this CUP and would be excited to see it last. So again, I want to thank you for your consideration of this matter. Please let me know if you have questions for me. As I mentioned, there were a number of things in there that I would love to address, but to cram it all into 15 minutes I don't think is really possible.
Thank you, Mr. Merkel. Any questions for Mr. Merkel before we start in? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, we have listened to everyone and how this will work. We will start with appellant letter number 1, Ryan Pilgrim. So,
Mr. Mayor?
yes.
May I just reiterate what the decision process we're going to be going
Sure,
through?
that'd be great.
Now that you've heard the arguments and the response from the respondent, from the applicant, you have the choice of one of 3 choices of action to be made on each appeal. You can sustain the Board of Adjustment's decision in whole or in part. You can reverse the decision in whole or in part, or you can remand the matter in whole or in part back to the BOA, as long as an applicant has demonstrated that there is new material information which was not available and that could not be readily discovered at the time of the Board of Adjustment hearing. And if you do remand it back to the Board of Adjustment, give directions to gather the additional material information, and then have the Board of Adjustment provide a decision along with a reasoned statement based upon the original evidence and the additional evidence.
I have a question for you,
Okay.
Mr. Hall. If we decide to, for instance, on any one of these appeals, to remand it back, does that stop the proceeding? Does it, or do we have to? We would have to rule on all of them,
We will-
regardless of whether
yes.
it's upheld, remanded, or
We have to
overturned?
discuss. We have to discuss every single letter.
There are
So-
5 appeals,
Yep.
and each one need to be addressed. And if you uphold 4 of them, and if you decide to remand one back, that would be the only one that would go back, or whatever your decision is today.
So we will start with letter number 1, and or other questions for staff or whatever. Did you have?
No, I was just going to start.
Okay, go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, well, in the first letter, I moved to remand. Hold on. Gotta look at my motion. I moved to remand the appeal based on criteria 4 and 7 that had to do with parking times, and to send it back to the Board of Adjustment because it was in conflict with the comprehensive plan. And they said, quote, can't compare educational parking to other uses given there was no data given. And that goes with the one that said there was no evidence, not enough evidence available at the time.
I'll second that.
Okay, we got a motion by Catherine
Sorry, that was kind of bumpy.
and a second by Jim to remand appellant letter number 1 back. We will have further discussion and let other counselors discuss it because of criteria 4 and 7 based on Catherine's interpretation. John?
He had his.
Art?
I had my paw up there, but staff. In the 3 versions of parking requirements that staff put together as part of the original documentation, you had one for auditorium, you had one for residents, and then the last one was for business and mixed use. And that was arrived at 57 parking spaces.
Correct.
Where did 47 come from?
So the 47, we talked about if we were to displace this whole hearing and focus on a educational institution outside of central business zone, the existing number that we came up with for full-time equivalent students plus the 44 staff, we subtracted that from the 57 of the proposed use on scenario 3, which would give us an additional 47 stalls required.
Additional beyond
normal use, if it was seen as retail. Basically, the impact of retail within the community, like if it was essentially the retail by right or commercial property by right, that would be an impact of a total of 57 parking stalls within central business.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we look at that projected use and then superimpose it over the use of a educational institution, that's where we got that total 47 stalls from.
So is the calculus for the educational institution the 1 space for each faculty member plus 1 for every 5 students?
Correct.
So 60 plus 44.
I'll go back to the presentation here. Oh, went a little too far.
Quick on the trigger there.
So 1 parking stall per faculty or staff member plus 1 for every 5 students.
That's
Now,
107.
we look at the total enrollment, which would equal 300 students and 44 faculty. So outside of the central business zone, the overall parking requirement would be for 104 parking stalls. And if we look at scenario 3, where the conversion from a mixture of retail and office spaces to the overall park demand, if we were to let CJ's and the existing building go to traditional retail and office space, the overall parking demand within downtown would be a total of 57 spaces. That number was extrapolated from the overall square footage of multiple floors, as well as, and we omitted any kind of common areas, assembly areas, hallways, and we got the total amount of parking spaces by the square footage, which is essentially anywhere else within the motor business district or general business district. So we've got those 104 stalls minus the 57, gave us the total requirement of 47 spaces beyond normal use.
I see where it came from. I'm not sure I'm in agreement, but.
Mr. Bowles.
Do you have a question, Jim?
Yeah, for Ryan. I attended the first meeting, and when there was no data for the noon hour parking thing, that was the kind of stood out. And I know Mr. Long questioned that, why there was no data for the 11 to 1 area when a lot of people are downtown having lunch and using those businesses, and there would be a high demand for that. And I was wondering how difficult would it be for you guys to provide that information to Board of Adjustment for, if it is remanded, and that's basically my basis for seconding.
Certainly. So there's 2 points in that. The 2 audits from the 9 a.m. and 2 p.m., that was based off of the IT standards, which talks about the to 2 visits for students. That's where we derived that data from. We weren't looking at the overall impact on specifics of business use at the peak hour of noon or at lunch hour, because it was coinciding with the specific use of that property, not necessarily the specific cumulative impact use. The other portion of that question was in regards to the board's response about having a noontime study. Staff can only disclose so much information when corresponding with the Board of Adjustments with an upcoming conditional use permit. It would be considered ex parte to get too much information and disclose detailed studies of what we're planning on doing. So we have to walk a fine line with acquiring as much data as we can without providing the Board of Adjustments with some, or swaying their decision in some manner of course through ex parte communication. So it would be plausible to take back to the Board of Adjustments. There are things to consider, though, if it does get remanded. We've got a certain time frame to take care of that overall parking study. The parking study was also conducted while we still had full-time students at the University of Idaho and WSU, which would have an impact on the data. So any items that get remanded back would have to be taken into consideration that the data may not truly reflect what happened at the time of the initial parking audit.
I'm going to move on to, we've got a couple of counselors down here, both John Weber and Gina Teruscio, and I don't.
Well, I share the concern about the perceived gap in data, but I also resonate pretty strongly with Dr. Merkel's statements about the onerous task of all of a sudden gathering all of this information. So I'm straddling the fence at this point.
John?
I agree with you, Gina. I think that at this point we could spend the next 10 years having someone say, well, you didn't look at this, you didn't look at this, you didn't look at this. And that, I think, would defeat the purpose of having a planning and zoning. It would defeat the purpose of having a board of adjustment. And then it would also defeat the purpose of Moscow being a business-friendly town. And when I hear these complaints about parking, parking in Moscow has always been an issue. I've lived here since 1954. Parking is always an issue, and the only way that we're going to improve parking would be to take half the buildings off of Main Street and turn them into a parking lot. Of course, we're not going to do that. But the issue of there isn't enough parking, I simply don't buy it. If you want to park in downtown, you can park in downtown. And I'm not in agreement with that motion.
Art?
Just one more comment. When we're discussing the parking, a point was made by Dr. Merkel about the dimensions of parking lots. Eventually you get to a tipping point when you start requiring vast parking lots that changes the character of the central business district. And so there's a fine line between provision of additional parking to mitigate the use and wrecking the character of the central business district. And trying to find that balance is a difficult issue. But I think should this go back and be remanded to the Board of Adjustment, that I would like to see them do a little, perhaps to inaccurately phrase it, but mixing apples and oranges, where you're looking at educational institution parking requirements versus the mixed-use parking requirements, and that kind of brings two completely different uses together. And I think that the Board of Adjustment needs to think which side of that divide do they want to be on, 57, or do they want to be on the 104, and keep those two separated and not intermingle them and try to do a calculus that involves retail, mixed-use, and educational institutions at the same time.
So I want to get this straight, because to me it was just a little bit confusing what you said. You
Absolutely.
want to have business in one hand and educational in the other hand?
You have to decide which side of the fence you're going to go on and not do a calculus that involves both of them into the same calculation.
Your Honor.
Bill.
If I might just make a couple quick comments on the parking assessment. So the inventory of available parking and use of public parking was really intended just to be some information that the board could take into consideration. The basis of the mitigation was taking a look at common and typical uses that are allowed in the downtown, in the central business district, where no off-street parking is required, and looking at the applicant and requiring them to mitigate their disproportionate impact that exceeded that number. So it's exactly what the council did when the council considered the current location of NSA. They looked at the use of the building if it were for permitted uses of office and retail, and then they looked at the demand for the educational institution, and they required the mitigation of the difference between the two. And that's where the 42 parking spaces came in that case. So in order to kind of give an equitable treatment to the use that is the only use into the code that does not necessarily say that it has to provide parking, but that the city has to consider the impact upon public parking in consideration of the issuance of a conditional use permit, we felt that the most equitable way would be to make an assessment of parking demand for other uses that are not required to provide any parking downtown and to require them to mitigate the disproportionate use. The assessment of current utilization of public parking within 600 feet of the property was merely more informative. It was not the basis of the determination of what was going to be required to mitigate the impact. And so while that information was available to the board, and the board certainly did consider it, and it was commented that it would be nice to have a count at noon, it was not the basis of the requirement of the mitigation at that time, at least not as staff presented it. We were looking at the mitigation of the disproportionate impact above and beyond uses by right that are not required to provide any parking and requiring the mitigation of that additional impact.
Follow-up question on that, Bill. So if this was remanded back, as some have spoke about on parking, aren't we getting into the Board of Adjustment does not make decisions on parking assessments, if I'm correct. Who does that? They have to live within what they've got to work with. Am I correct on that?
Well, it'd be ultimately up to the board to make the decision about the information that's available before them and understanding whether they think the conditional use permit can be granted and whether the relevant criteria have been met and have been demonstrated by the applicant to be in conformance. So that is the board that has to make that determination, and we can certainly provide whatever information. And the board had the option to request additional information or studies from the applicant at the time of the hearing and chose not to do that.
And the Board of Adjustment found criteria 4 and criteria 7, as was discussed, as adequate.
As is documented in the reason statement in your packet this evening.
Okay. One more, Mr. Mayor. Don't mean to be argumentative, but the other businesses up and down the central business district are tax-paying entities, and to an extent, they, through their property taxes, pay for the parking that goes on downtown. An educational institution is exempt from taxation, and therefore, perhaps what I'm suggesting is the board needs to contemplate a greater offset of the impact as a result of that, rather than incorporating an offset of the 104 spaces. And that's why I suggest separate, go one way or the other, but don't try to split the difference with calculations.
Well, in the testimony, too, that we received, there was no businesses downtown that disagreed with what they're trying to do because they're getting business. So that's something that this body needs to take into consideration as well. You separate that out. Yes.
If I might, generally taxable status is not a consideration in land use matters, and churches are allowed in the central business district by right, and there are a number of them that are tax-exempt institutions downtown. That's really not something that we can base mitigation upon the taxable status of an individual use. We really need to look at the impact of the use as a whole. We require reasonable mitigation, but to make a disparate decision on one entity, if you had a for-profit university, educational institution, and you had a nonprofit tax-exempt, we really couldn't treat the two uses differently. We need to treat them the same.
So, okay, Catherine.
Was the first conditional use permit given in 2003?
The first conditional use permit was given in 2006 and then became permanent in 2008.
Okay, so then the code was updated in
2005, I believe.
Okay, so it just so happens that I also questioned the central business district definition, and it talks about that the commercial institution and educational institution quandary. I just happened to see this the same way as Art did when I was taking my notes, that was the conflict, and that's why the cumulative impact, which is criteria number 7, wasn't addressed completely. So I felt like that was why it needs to be remanded and sent back to the Board of Adjustment.
Sure. And if it's being remanded, so before a vote's taken on the motion, it would be helpful to have really clear instruction to the board.
Mm-hmm.
If it was that you wish them to develop additional information, what is that information you wish them to develop? Or if you wish them to reconsider, there's required they have specific instruction that's granted to them. So if you are remanding in whole or in part for look at one element or to obtain additional information, if it's the noontime count you'd like to see so that they have that information available to them, or if it's something else, it would be very helpful for the board to have very specific instruction about what it is the council wishes them to reconsider, or what additional information that we as staff or the applicant need to develop and to be able to provide to the board for them to include that in the record and to consider it.
So does that require an amendment of the motion?
No, it doesn't require an amendment. It just that we got to have it's
Clear.
clarity. If this is going to go back to Board of Adjustments, you need to be pretty. If you want to say, look, you need to do parking studies every hour on the hour, 3 times. The 9 to 2 doesn't work for you. You need one at 9 and 10 and noon and 2 or 4, whatever it may be. That's what they're going to need to know. If that's how I understood what you just said, Bill?
That's correct, Your Honor. We would like to have precision in what is being requested
and it would be
of
a
them.
specific thing, not a broad array of things. If it's just on parking studies or traffic or whatever that would be, it has to be specific to what it would.
What underneath the preponderance of the evidence has been presented to the council that was not available at that time that should have been considered, and what is in the public interest to be developed on the record?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need to have identified.
So my question is still, does that have to be part of the motion, those specifics?
I wasn't sure I had a clear understanding of what specific information the motion entailed. A restatement of the motion might be helpful to make sure we understand.
And we'll have Lori read it back to us. It had to deal with criteria 4 and 7. That's one of the problems we run into, and we talk a lot about stuff like this, but it's important to get. So, Lori, could you tell us what the motion was? No. Yeah, you got no idea? Well, it was
recording. So, if you could restate the motion, that would be.
Yeah, I had moved to remand the appeal based on
number 1,
criteria,
appellate 1.
Yeah, appellate 1 based on criteria 4 and 7, which had to do with parking and the cumulative impact. The appellate talked about there was no data given, and you can't compare the educational use to the commercial use, and that there was a request for more information because of that to be sent back to the board. So it's in part.
So, if I might, so
Yeah.
you're remanding it back. So when you look at criteria,
Mm-hmm.
those are the basis of the decision. That's not necessarily information. So if we're looking back at what information is necessary then in order to fully assess that criteria, staff did commingle the mixed use versus the educational institution on purpose to calculate the disproportionate impact of the parking that would be required to be mitigated, as was done by the council in 2006 in the current location. If this council wishes to impose a different standard of what they think that parking mitigation should be, then maybe that instruction, well, either you can modify the decision to modify that based on what you feel is appropriate at this time, or you can give them instruction to consider that. But I guess I'm still trying to get down to the new information that you're looking at trying to develop, and if it's the...
I understand. I'm sorry that I'm unclear because it's difficult to formulate, except because with reading with the minutes and stuff. So what the board member Long was asking, it actually has to do with more of what he was asking. So if we have to lay out particulars, and I can lay out particulars, I would like to see more studies done with the appellate's request. I felt like what was enumerated in her request about the different times and looking at the cumulative effect. So if we could go back to the appellate letter, maybe I could pull it from there.
Sure, that'd be great.
And so also, if I may interject, I think the reexamination by the board of the commercial mixed use versus educational institutional parking requirements would be beneficial, because I don't think they looked at it. Marshall Comstock indicated that he thought the parking requirements were far, far too low. And so I get the impression that the board was unsure themselves of which way to go on that issue.
What I find compelling.
Gary, you act like you want to make a comment.
Yeah, you have a majority of the Board of Adjustment who made a decision. That is the basis of your review. The dissenting opinions of individuals who were not on the prevailing side are not evidence to be looked at by this body. If there is specific information that you wish to elucidate from the Board of Adjustment through additional studies, I think what Bill's asking for is, if you don't like the commercial versus educational mix, then provide guidance as to what mix, if any, you want, or if you want it to be a particular use that you would like it to be compared to. And then, again, if there were comments by Commissioner Long that specifically address those issues, then it's this body's duty to specifically direct the Board of Adjustment as to what information you'd like developed, and if there is a way you would like it developed, to give that instruction as well.
Do we have any other time to think about this? I'm just kidding.
No,
I read on
gonna
this.
be-
I'm sorry. I didn't mean
it's
to. I'm
gonna
not
be-
making light of this. I'm sorry. It's
Well,
just difficult.
let's stick with the facts
I am.
and
I-
get right to it then.
So, in part, I would appreciate that then the parking conditions that were put up, those three that you put up, would you put those back up?
Are these the standards that you're referring to?
Right, and you chose, and you all did three.
I think she's referring to the three scenario parking demands.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
There.
So then to reconsider scenario 3, conversion to mixed commercial and office, and for there to be a requirement of more spaces. And therefore, you have to do more studies.
Actually,
And
you
then
could have put up scenario number 4, which would be 100% educational,
Yeah, okay.
and consider each of those 4 separately rather than commingling.
Gary had a point.
Are you requesting that they find that more spaces are necessary? I thought that's what you just said.
I just felt like there, in the reading that I did from the minutes, I was left with information that was incomplete.
Okay.
And so to get more complete information from all the readings that we have done, I identified with Mr. Long and felt like it needed to be remanded based on the fact that there needed to be more information from city staff in scenarios, because I felt like that didn't satisfy the request. And number 7 of the cumulative impact on the comprehensive plan.
Okay, Bill, you have...
Just two things, I guess. The first of which of inadequate information. So if the council wishes to direct to be remanded to the Board of Adjustment with additional parking studies carried out at different times of day in order to have more complete information, that's one thing. If ultimately the parking requirement is going to be based on some number, whether it's the 104 spaces for the educational institution, just with no credit for any other potential use of the building, then you kind of wonder what is the necessity of that additional study. And maybe, I mean, the council does have the authority to affirm the decision and amend it and increase the required off-street parking. I mean, it almost seems like you're looking for an outcome rather than adding additional information. And if that's the council's wish, the council does have the authority to amend the condition of approval if the council wishes to do so.
Mine wasn't outcome related. Mine was I felt as though I had insufficient information.
And so if that's the case, then the remand would be to conduct additional parking studies to capture parking utilization in hours from early morning through the evening in order to assess what is available other than what was captured at 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Mm-hmm. And then the board consider that further. And if there's further instruction regarding what standard is to be applied for the mitigation, I guess you could certainly provide that information as well.
Jeannie,
This is for Ryan. Where did 9 and 2 come from again?
9 and 2 were the general peak hours for that individual study, for the ITE study.
What is ITE?
The ITE was, as previously discussed, talking about the engineering study that was conducted for multiple universities that we derived some of our information from.
Okay, so all right. So what we have is data that's been recommended from a multi-university study, generally accepted as the authority on this sort of thing. Is that what I'm getting from this?
Perhaps
national standard of some sort?
Yeah, I mean, the IT manual provides estimations of traffic that will be generated from a variety of land uses based on a number of studies.
Okay.
But the 9 and 2 really was not derived from the IT manual. Those were hours we just selected to do an evaluation of parking utilization as it may appear in the morning when students may be arriving and in the afternoon time period. So there was no, it was just times that were selected. Ultimately, that was not the basis of the parking mitigation requirement. It was the comparison of, and essentially the same mitigation that was applied to NSA's current location, which was to assess parking demands of that building if it were in other uses like any other business downtown, and requiring them to mitigate the parking that they demanded that exceeded what would be required of those other uses. So while it was information that was shared to talk about what's the current utilization, it was not intended to be really the basis of the determination of the mitigation that would be required for the use.
Right.
And so we can certainly take a look and more information can be developed. It wouldn't change necessarily how we would recommend looking at mitigation, but that's ultimately up to the board or ultimately up to the council if it's appealed to this body. And so, but
I find the statement that you just made rather compelling in that it is you made a reasoned recommendation from the last time we dealt with an educational institution being on Main Street. And then also, I'm not convinced that we're going to get any different data, even though we bring more in. I don't think we're going to find a compelling reason to change any of this. Plus, the Board of Adjustment looked at all of this and still made their decision the way they did, their recommendation. So I am not convinced we need to go back for more.
John?
I agree with you, Gina. I think that as far as this parking thing goes, CJ's was down there for years. Every Friday night, every Saturday night, they'd have 1,000 people in that bar. And didn't hear a complaint from anybody. Occasionally, the cops would talk about the fact that they had to break up a fight or two. Well, it's a bar. You're going to have to break up a fight or two in a college bar, in a college town. But I think what we've got here is people didn't like the outcome, and now they're trying to find a way to get a recount. And I don't think that is the ethical thing for the city to do. I think everybody ought to be treated essentially the same. And I haven't heard Mingles. Nobody said anything about Mingles not having enough parking places. And I think we're opening up a can of worms. And by saying that in this particular place with this particular business, we don't like it. And I think that using the dodge of we don't like it because of the parking is just that. Just a dodge. And I can't support that motion of Kathleen made.
I'm going to agree with John about the perception of parking downtown is more of a problem than the actual availability of parking. But in this particular instance where it's an educational institution as opposed to a business, I think the addition of more data is like warranted to make. I would doubt that the Board of Adjustment will, if it's remanded, that it will change their decision, but I just think that they will be more comfortable, and it's probably, the outcome is probably more likely to be unanimous than split. So I'd very much like to see some data about the noon hour, and I'd very much like to see some data about where the parking is going to be located for the educational institution. That's my basis for seconding the motion.
And I'll say one thing about that. Educational institutions not going to secure the parking until they get the CUP. If they don't get they're not going to buy parking and then not get the CUP. I mean, they'd be foolish to do that. So,
well, I wouldn't expect them to buy the parking,
whatever.
But to identify where it may be could be possibly done.
So,
I'm struggling with sending this back, not anticipating a different result. I struggle with a remand if we think we're going to get the same answer.
well, John, we
Call the question.
okay. Call the question. We'll take the vote. I'll start with John.
No.
No.
Aye.
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 Okay, it will be remanded back with parking as the issue, specific times. That's how I get that. 9, noon, and 9 and 2 is already done, so somebody said the noon hour. And
Can we fill in those details?
we
Do we
don't,
have to do it right
no, that's what they're going to need to know why we're remanded it back to them, and is on parking
Have to
issues.
do it
If
right.
we need specific information, this is the time to
Yep.
say what that specific information that is missing that the board could not have had at that time period.
Okay, so in the Board of Adjustment minutes, Long requests these things. He asked the same request. He doesn't have the times listed, but he had the same thing. So on page 8 of 9 in the board minutes, and Comstock spoke about this as well, and he had reservations about the parking. So I guess what my request then is in part, the cumulative effect, which is criteria number 7, can't be met because we don't know the impact. So that means we have to be more specific in the times that are taken. So to fulfill that requirement, then we need to fulfill with going on with the schools and businesses times that are open, and maybe we need to do it hourly.
So you want a
It's an educational
traffic study hourly done? Is that what
I
you're
think
saying?
noon would be fine.
I mean,
Okay, I don't know. That's why I'm talking about it.
I think
I
noon
just
would be
know
fine.
more needs to be done by what was stated in the minutes.
Yeah, 11 to 1 time zone would encompass that. And that doesn't leave a whole lot of hours in the day if you do an 11 to 1 plus the other 2 sets of time. But also keep in mind, the point made by staff is that we may not be getting the data that we think we're getting because we'll be taking this study in order to meet the statutory requirements for a response from the Board of Adjustment. It's going to be outside of the normal
Right.
school time, so things may have changed from the original study, so we have to tread very gently with our
well,
interpretation.
that's just the consequence we have, Art.
Yep.
Because this body's making that decision, and so that's the way it's going to be. So there you have it.
How long is the study then? How long does it go for? Is it 5 days like the other ones?
It's ultimately up to council to decide that if it's sufficient enough to meet the overall demands.
Bill, you got a point on that one?
On the duration of the study?
Well, they wanted to know how long would this traffic study have to take? So a 2-week period, a 1-week period,
Prior assessment we
Monday
did was
through
during-
Fridays and skip weekends? How's that work?
Prior assessment we did was in a 5-day period during work week.
Okay.
We could replicate that and capture the noon time. If that's all the council wishes the board to consider.
Gary?
Which is what I'm trying to determine. Are you asking for that one period during the noon time, noon to 1 o'clock? Is that the study that you wish to have
Well,
additional data?
you got 9 a.m. and you got 2 p.m. Jim had said 11 a.m. to 1.
11 to 1, I think, would encompass everything that the dissenting members of the board felt was inadequate information and the appellant felt was inadequate information.
Okay. I'm being advised by Les that typically these counts are done at finite times. That's why you have it at 9 and 3. So you can't do it over a 2-hour period. You could do one at 11, one at 12, and one at 1. You could do one at 11, one at 1, and any mixture of those.
Well, I think you've got 9 a.m. and you got 2 p.m. Seems to me if you're going to do this, 11 and 1 would be reasonable.
That's the whole
I
day.
mean-
Yeah, pretty much.
So you want a traffic study done at 11 o'clock a.m. and 1 o'clock p.m.
I'd be fine with that.
4 or 5 days.
Is this going to require a motion?
And just to clarify, we're looking, this was only 600 feet from the property. So it was essentially a 2-block area. That same area is what you wish to have assessed, just at a different time.
It would have to be within the realm of that. I mean, you don't want to go completely out of the central business district. That makes no sense. So it's got to be relative.
Okay.
Or it wouldn't be relative. You go down Jackson Street, which people are, or Washington, when people are going through town, you're getting everything bypassed into downtown, too. So that wouldn't be. But I think we're clear on it. There's nothing else you want to add, is there?
No, mostly just, I thought that there was something in the minutes that was talking about parking within a half a mile.
That was the required parking mitigation would have to be located within that distance.
Yeah. So if that's part of the mitigation, wouldn't you have to look at those too?
Mm-mm.
You don't?
We were just looking at public parking in the downtown system. Half mile reaches outside the central business district,
right.
Some distance. So
Yeah.
we won't be assessing all public parking in that area. We were looking at what was in the immediate vicinity that supports the businesses and other properties in the immediate area.
What the staff's looking for is it's got to be specific for Board of Adjustment, Catherine, or it's going to be a hodgepodge all over town, which won't work because they've got to have a specific area. If you do the entire town, a half a mile or wherever this parking area.
No, that's why I was asking, because half a mile was one of the mitigations.
Where you would put it.
That's where it goes.
Yeah, that's how far out it goes. That's like to the university.
Yeah, that's not where you're going to be testing people driving.
Okay.
Also, as part of that, could include the 3 scenarios listed for the parking comparison, plus the educational institution component.
Yes.
And then ask the board, are you good with where it was, where you decided, or would one of these others be more appropriate in their opinion? So that they aren't.
Okay, so we're clear. We'll repeat the study, 5-day time period, 600 feet. We'll do a count during the noon hour.
Sure.
In addition, we'll do the 9 and 2 again. We can then correlate, essentially, if there's a 20% increase during the lunch hour in those areas, we can correlate that to the data that existed and was collected previously. And that's probably the best available information that we could gather for the board at this time. I guess I'm trying to understand the instruction of looking at the different scenarios versus the educational institution. I mean, the board did consider that at that time. Certainly, the council can request them to reevaluate that determination if that's what the council wishes to see.
Yeah.
That would be fine by me, just a reevaluation, get a real look at it, because they just sailed right through.
Mm-hmm. I saw the same thing.
Okay, and that determination is requested comes from these 3 counselors. The 2 that were nay on the votes weren't part of it. So should we move on to number 2?
Just for clarification, going to ask, you're remanding it back for a specific study during the noon period. That's an additional one that you want is 12 p.m.?
I think they've said 11 and 1 is what I.
Yeah, that's what we want to clarify. What is
11
it?
and 1.
11 and 1?
Yep.
Okay. And then you also want them to do another comparison. Any specific instructions on when you want it to compare it to, or what they should compare it to?
I'll remand it to Art, because he's the one.
Specific instructions looking at what exists outside the central business district for the various uses that were listed up there, plus the educational uses, and have them re-examine that, and then re-examine the calculus that went into subtracting the offset use in the central business district from the educational use to arrive at the parking mitigation that they got, the result being 47 spaces, and ask them to re-examine that calculus and make sure that that's actually what they wanted to do.
Right.
Okay.
I think they already did that.
Okay.
I'm not so sure.
If I may, that's I'm struggling a little bit with that. If the council wants to direct a different calculation that they'd wish them to consider, then I certainly understand that direction to reevaluate what they did previously.
I think they need to go back and look at exactly is that the best calculation to be using? Is that what they really meant? Because they kind of, 47 and ran with it, and there was no discussion of any of the other scenarios.
I think it was because that's what they did in the prior CUP.
It might be, but...
That was what we talked about, yes.
Yeah,
That was the decision process from the prior CUP. So there is a precedent there.
In that case...
So I would almost find that insulting if I was the Board of Adjustment, that, oh, wait, are you sure?
Yeah, that's exactly
Well,
it.
they made a solid decision, I believe, with the process the first time.
So I'd just like to have that stated clearly, that we used this calculus because of, it makes most sense for what is there that we want to mitigate.
Yeah, I think it goes to the cumulative effect, because you're adding more than twice as much to an educational institution, and that's a cumulative effect. And so,
Okay, well, we beat 1 to death. How about we move on to 2, and we'll see what you guys have got.
Your Honor, just one potential request. Could we do a 12:30 count? I'm afraid if you do the 11 or the 1, you're on the shoulders of the kind of lunch period. If that was deemed to be the peak of demand, would a 12:30 in the middle of the noon hour be?
That'd be okay with you guys?
I'm just afraid of counting 11 is really early ahead of lunch demand. 1, you may miss some.
Is that okay with you, Catherine?
If that's okay.
Thank you for thinking
just
about
to
Make it 12:30 then.
Make sure we don't miss information again. I want to make sure we capture whatever it is the council and the board wishes to.
Or if I may, can we restate when these counts will take place?
Well, there's only going to be 1. It's going to be at
One.
12:30, because the 9 and the 2's done. Unless are we going to redo those two?
I would recommend that we do as staff, because the conditions are very different with the students being out at the University of Idaho. So we will do it at 9, 12:30, and 2. We can look at the percentage increase of demand during the noon hour. That will be information that the board could extrapolate that when students are in session, just to be able to give a bigger picture. But in order to maintain consistency with how it was done previously, I think that'll give us the best value of the additional information. I'm afraid a 12:30 count now will leave us with we'll leave the board with a lot of questions of, well, that's great, but college is out of session, and how do we relate this to the prior counts that were taken? So I do think it would be to the benefit of the board to do the 9 and 2 again.
I think so, too.
Okay.
One more comment, Bill, if I might.
You have plenty of time. We got 4 more of these.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, John.
The only thing I'm going to say is I have the uncomfortable feeling that if the study that we are just now requiring that the city doesn't come out with a requirement that New St. Andrews will have to supply 1 parking place for every student, we are going to continually go over this thing. It is always going to be brought back to us until we finally say enough is enough. And we certainly aren't there tonight.
Okay, well, let's move on. John, what do you got to say about number 2?
Pretty much the same thing as I've been saying right along. I think that this whole parking issue is a bit of a smokescreen, and I think there's some other reason, and I don't know what that is. Possibly the people that are bringing this to us could tell us that, but I don't think that the parking issue, 2 things. I don't think we can solve the parking issue in downtown Moscow. It is what it is. It's been that way for a long time. It's going to continue to be that way. And so saying that this group or that group has to supply 785 parking places, I think that is ridiculous.
Okay, well, let's move on to comments on 2. Art, what's your take on number 2?
I think the points that were of most interest to me on appeal number 2 were already covered in number 1.
Okay, but the catch is each one of these have either got to be sustained, denied, or remanded back. Well, each one of these. So we have 4 more of these we're going to hammer
So
on
number 2, because the issues are involved deeply with number one, I would say deny number two.
Second.
In other words, you're sustaining.
You're sustaining.
I'm sustaining the
Board of
Board of
Adjustment.
Adjustment decision.
Okay. So we have a sustained on the Board of Adjustments on appellant number 2, and we, by, Art made the motion, Jim made the second.
To sustain,
To sustain the Board of Adjustment.
To agree with what the Board of Adjustments
Per
said.
the Board of Adjustments decision.
Correct. Art's motion, Jim's second. Any discussion? Start with you, John.
I'll vote to sustain the Board of Adjustments decision.
Okay.
I will as well.
Aye.
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 Okay, so number 2, appellant will not be heard by them. And okay, let's go to number 3, appellant number 3, Tina Hilding.
I move to remand this appeal back to the Board of Adjustment for insufficient information based on the cumulative effect for number 7. It has to do with the contradiction criteria. Number 7 is with the comprehensive plan. Because criteria 7 talks about that it wouldn't be in conflict with the comprehensive plan. This has to do with the fact that the Central Business District in 2015 used the word intensive to define itself, which goes back to the original thing we talked about in Appellate Letter 1, which has to do, this is an educational institution, not a commercial use.
Well, your motion has died for lack of a second.
Okay, that's okay. Got it out there.
Although I do have a question, seems we're talking about student FTEs at this point of the appeal. And this would be for you, Dr. Merkel, is that are all the students for the conservatory, all 300 new students, going to be only at the new location?
Okay, so the 300 students is to be a credit-bearing student at New St. Andrews, and you're asking if will all those 300 students be only at, so would we put 300 in one and 200 here? I think that the bulk of the students would probably stay in one place, but I could see crossover, and our plan for monitoring that would be a full-time load is monitored by number of credits. So our thought was to make a maximum number of credits that could be offered, and a credit has to happen in a particular place.
Right.
So we would make the maximum number of credits that could happen in one building so that no more than 200 students could be in our current building, no more than 300
Or
there.
rather, not students, but FTEs.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, full-time enrollment, yes.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Your Honor, I move that we sustain the board's decision on appeal number 3.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion by Gina and a second by John to sustain the appellant number 2 for the board. It's sustained. Questions on that?
You answered my question on that one.
Yeah, that's my.
Okay, we'll start to roll with you, Art.
Aye?
Aye.
No.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so number 3 is sustained. We'll move on to number 4. Appellant number 4, John Davis.
I move we sustain the Board of Appeals decision on appeal number 4.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Catherine and a second by Jim to sustain the Board of Adjustments on appellant number 4. Discussion on that. We're all good? I'll start with the roll, John.
Aye.
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 Okay. Appellant number 5, David Hall.
Once again, relative to the consideration more data being needed. I think that's being addressed with our previous position on appeal number 1.
John?
Was that form of a motion?
Well, it could be. I move sustaining the Board of Adjustments finding on the matters discussed in number 5.
I'll second.
Okay, we got a motion by Art and a second by John to sustain appellant number 5 for the Board of Appeals. And I'll start the roll with John.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so that is sustained. So what we have, ladies and gentlemen, is appellant number 1. We'll be going back to Board of Adjustments for what was discussed, and that has to do with the studies. And something about the separation of parking, too.
We'll reevaluate the
Yes.
comparisons that were used.
So now, a question. We don't do anything on relevant criteria or any of those matters, but it's important for the group to know that this appellant number 1 is remanded back. So what is the course of action that the Board of Adjustment will do now? Bill?
If I might clarify, while you don't do a reason statement of relevant criteria, we will be drafting remand instructions for the council's review and approval to go back to the board. So what we'll do is we'll draft essentially a decision document of the council that directs this to be remanded back to the board with the specific instruction as was received this evening. We'll probably bring that back through committee and then through the council at the next meeting for the council's approval. That will give then written instruction to the board for reconsideration. Those additional studies will be conducted. We'll notice it for another public hearing, and it will be reheard then by the Board of Adjustment and with the instructions as provided by the council.
Okay. With that, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. It's 9:25. We'll reconvene at 9:35.
And I knew it when you saw it in part, I'm just like, oh.
We are re-adjourned at 9:35. Item number 8, cancellation of July 3rd meeting, City Council meeting. Gary Reedner, sir, you have the podium.
Your Honor, thank you. Moscow City Code 2-2-3 allows the City Council to cancel regularly scheduled council meetings. In this case, the first regularly scheduled City Council meeting in July would take place July 3rd, with the state, local, and federal holiday, Independence Day, being celebrated on July 4th. The anticipation is that we will have very little, if any, participation. So you've requested me, Mayor, to make the request of City Council that that meeting be postponed, or excuse me, be canceled. The next regular meeting would then be the 19th of July. So
Is it the 19th or the 17th?
excuse me, 17th of July. I meant the 19th would be, we will try to schedule the council's regular business so that it will either occur on the council meeting on July or June 19th or delayed until July 17th.
Now, with that being gone, what we got going on in July too is we got the usual 2-day workshop on the budget as well. So we'll have one actual council meeting in the month of July, which will be the 17th. So,
Do we need a motion?
yes, we do, John.
I would move that we cancel the July 3rd City Council meeting.
Second.
Okay, motion by John and a second by Gina to cancel the regular council meeting for July 3rd. Start to roll with Art.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that one is canceled. Now we'll go on quickly to reports. And I'll start with you, Jim.
About the only thing I have is the Moscow Arts Commission met last week to select public art for the library, and there were 5 submissions, and the committee rejected all of them, and it'll be put out again to a request for art again, and we'll have a meeting on that tomorrow, and there'll be some changes made in the geographical area that those submissions can come from, including any state that borders Idaho. So we should get a wider variety. Not that there weren't some good submissions, but there weren't any that the committee felt were the one we wanted. There was nobody on fire about any of them, and heavily supported one, and so we decided to go out again and see if we could find something that was more widely accepted. So that's what's going to happen. That's all I have.
Art.
I actually accumulated a few this time around. Clearwater RC&DC met and discussed the upcoming summer events, the hiring of the Youth Conservation Corps people, contributed some money to the PKC, and working to get more 6th grade forestry tours for students. The CETA also met, and it was pretty much just usual records keeping and things, but moving forward with getting fiber installed in Kendrick. They're moving forward to push fiber up that direction, and also working with Lewis Clark State College on the Northwest Intermountain Metal Manufacturing Career Development Program to start getting kind of training that's not associated with the university for needed careers. Human Rights Commission met and discussed the Latah Human Rights Task Force report, scheduled a commemorative vigil that was back on May 19th for Officer Lee Newbill, and have moved the Finding the Center conference that they put on frequently to a biennial, so there won't be one of those this year. The Tree Commission did a lot of discussing on things. Tree planting and pruning workshops were held, and reports were had on those. Also working to try to get new trees planted in existing subdivisions that have not taken advantage of the money that was contributed as part of the subdivision, try to get some trees out onto the tree lawns throughout the city. And so they're working rather diligently on that one through David Schott and the Parks Commission. Also found out that Avista may be willing to replace trees under power lines if they come through and chop them down, so the city might not have to do that. So Avista is actually looking to be a pretty good partner to help replenish the urban forest. Let's see. What else did we do? And also trying at the same time to diversify the forest so it's not maple, 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 maple up and down every street in town, and get a little diversity, because anytime you've got a monoculture, you're courting insects and disease that would truncate the lifespan of the things. And just taking another look at declining trees in neighborhoods and letting people know that help is available if a tree needs to be removed, but also the fact that the tree needs to be replaced. So they're working on the urban forest rather diligently. And that's what I've got for you tonight.
Okay, Catherine.
Parks and Rec met, and they had a large discussion about the approval of the Hamilton funds. Mostly there was a good history given. There's new park members, commission members, and so they didn't know some of the background, so that was very helpful. Damien, I don't know his last name. He's been on there for a long, long time. Yeah, he did a really nice job of bringing new members up to date. There's still a vacancy, so hopefully that'll get filled. And then they did talk about the tree planting art, and David was really excited because just so far there's been 23 vouchers for trees. So he's like, yay, we're going to do things to do that. Greg Morrison talked about all the recreational programs and fast pitch at the high school, and it has been hard when the fields were so wet, so we had a big conversation about trying to get fast-pitch softball here. Hiring of lifeguards, everything's supposed to open. The Masters started last Friday using the pool. They worked out a condition with them, and the community gets to use the pool starting June 9th. And normally they have 14 to 16 lifeguards on 4-hour shifts. And then there was a big philosophical discussion about how to support, pay for the maintenance and operations of the HERC and candy sales, and with the mission to be healthy and then buy sugar. So they were having a big of trying to figure out what to do and how to do that kind of stuff. They didn't come to any kind of decision, but they're just trying to figure out how to figure out maintenance and operation of the building. Oh, and then I want to talk about Zagster came and presented on noon on Wednesday. So we had Brian Patnode come in from San Francisco and talk about bike sharing, and we had stakeholders at the table to talk about bike sharing with the pilot program put in place. So he did a fine job explaining all about Zagster and how they work in 140 other small to medium-sized communities, and he gave the feasibility study and also information about Zagster in general, and they're looking hopefully to see if we'll work with them. So
I might add to that I took Brian on a tour of the city on a bicycle so he could see where potential sites for stations for bike share bikes might be, and told him about our plans for the underpasses, and he was quite excited. And they're also bidding something at WSU and Pullman, so that they have already started to install them in Coeur d'Alene. So they'll have a presence in this area, and it should tie in really well.
He even talked to me about they're already talking to Lewiston as well. So that would be cool if we worked with them.
Gina.
It must be the week or the month for philosophical conversations, because the Sustainable Environment Commission met, and we talked about, we normally sponsor some sort of a movie at the Kenworthy, so we talked about that and kind of decided which one we wanted to go with then. But then we really got into the philosophy of pesticide use in the city, and talked very much about, is it glyphosate that we're against this year, or if we're against something else. And I really encouraged them to go the educational route first, rather than just we want to get this out of here, we can't use it, so build the groundwork, and then, anyway, they want to move to a pesticide-free world. And so we got into the philosophy of all of that, and then it was 10 o'clock and we all went home to bed. And I will have a Pathways Commission meeting that will not go until 10 o'clock at night in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. John.
Right now we're trying to set up a time for a meeting for the planning, help me out here, Gary, the
URA?
Not the URA, but for the
Fair and affordable housing and zoning? Fair and affordable housing, John?
What?
Fair and affordable housing that
No,
showed
fair
up?
and affordable housing, that was canceled.
Okay.
That meeting was canceled, but this is for the, looking at the city building codes.
Oh, the Building Code Advisory Group.
Yeah.
Yeah, advisory.
We're trying to set up a time where we can all show up.
It's like charades.
And in my case, hopefully, I'll still be somewhere around town and maybe somebody can direct me. Okay, go here, John. Go in here. Talk to these people.
Okay.
You don't have to say anything smart. Just talk to them.
Okay. May 31st had an airport board meeting, and they are moving tons and tons of dirt, lots of cubic yards of dirt, and they got lots more to move. I'll leave it at that. And as Catherine had said, and Jim and John, we were all at the Zagster meeting last week as well, and they had a nice presentation. Okay, a question for you, Gary. Do we have a breakfast this Wednesday somewhere?
Sir, 7
What?
noon at the Best Western.
Okay, we've also got an Inland Northwest Partner meeting at 1912, which I'm going to be at.
9 o'clock till 2:30.
Yeah, so are you going to that as well?
We'll be covering the luncheon.
You'll be kicking the luncheon.
I think Belknap and you are going to the Inland Northwest Partners.
Okay.
Gina is as well.
Okay, so some of us will be there, but the other one is at noon at the Best Western.
Yes, it'll be on the patio. It's our
Because
annual.
of the summer thing, till school starts for the next couple of months, so I want to make sure everybody knew that.
While you're talking about conflicts, there's Farmers Market Commission at 4 o'clock, and we typically have a meeting at that time. So, what do you? Either I will be absent.
Just tomorrow?
Yeah.
Talking about? What do you wanna
We could either delay that or cancel it and pick it up again next week. It's up to you.
I'm fine with.
I'll
You
be
can give
appearing
me
at
a
Farmers Market Commission as well.
annotated version of what goes on, and I'll be happy with that, I guess.
Okay.
All right, good enough. Anything else, Gary?
Just want to remind council that the AIC conference starts on the 22nd, which is a Wednesday, and so I believe that the mayor, Art, are you going?
He's
The
out.
mayor,
Utah.
Gina, Catherine.
Are you going to be down for that?
No, I can't go to that.
I don't know what my chemical schedule is.
Okay.
I'm going to start selling that stuff.
John's scheduled to go, whether he goes or not, and we have several staff members as well. So we'll get coverage, but want to make sure that I likely will be missing the council meeting on the 19th, but the assistant city supervisor will be more than happy to cover my duty.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? 9:47. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, Lord.